When Final Fantasy VII launched in January of 1997, it was big. Between its groundbreaking visuals, complex narrative, innovative gameplay mechanics, aggressive marketing campaign, and the simple fact that many Western gamers had never played a JRPG before, Final Fantasy VII became one of the defining games of its generation, and a must-have for any owner of the original PlayStation. The impact of Final Fantasy VII was so great that more than 2 decades after its launch, a full HD reimagining was released to both critical and commercial acclaim. For millions of gamers, myself included, playing Final Fantasy VII was a seminal experience, influencing the way we view video games, storytelling, and even life itself. But why? What made this game so impactful? Why is it so fondly remembered even after 24 years? And how did a video game about pixelated Lego people using soul magic to stop a meteor manage to touch the hearts and minds of millions? To answer those questions and more, let's dive in to why Final Fantasy VII matters. First, some background information. The Final Fantasy series began in 1987 with a struggling Japanese software company called Square and a 24-year-old college dropout named Hironobu Sakaguchi. Square was founded in 1983 and released a number of games for the Famicom and various home computer systems. None of these games garnered much attention, and by 1986 Square was on the verge of bankruptcy. To save the company, Sakaguchi proposed the development of a turn-based fantasy role-playing game, heavily modeled off of Enix's Dragon Quest, released earlier that year. In 2003, Square and Enix merged into a single company, but throughout the 80s and 90s they were rivals, making similar games and vying for similar audiences. Final Fantasy was an ambitious project. Most video games throughout the 70s and 80s were developed by either very small teams or even a single programmer. Final Fantasy took a more collaborative approach, consisting of a large team with each member assigned to a specific task. Sakaguchi headed development, while artist Yoshitaka Amano designed the characters and provided concept art. The game's music was composed by Nobuo Uematsu, while an Iranian-American programmer named Nasir Gebeli handled coding. Kenji Terada, a freelance writer, was hired to flesh out the story and write dialogue. This specialized approach was bold and expensive, but it ensured that at each stage of development, Final Fantasy received the full attention of an expert in that particular field. The game had to be a success. If it failed, Square would fail. The working title was Fighting Fantasy, but to avoid copyright issues with the series of choose-your-own-adventure books by the same name, it was changed to Final Fantasy. Sakaguchi has gone on record saying he merely wanted an alliterative title to make the game stand out, that anything abbreviated to FF would have sufficed. An enduring myth is that the name Final Fantasy was chosen to emphasize that this was Square's final chance to make the game, that if they failed, their fantasy of being a game company would come to an end. The story is apocryphal, and no one from Square has ever officially confirmed it. On the other hand, no one's officially denied it either. Final Fantasy released in Japan in December of 1987. It was a hit, selling 400,000 copies on the Famicom and an additional 200,000 on home computer. Square had hit on something big, and development of a sequel began almost immediately. While Square made a variety of games throughout the 80s and 90s, the Final Fantasy series was their bread and butter. Its ever-evolving combat system, sprawling open worlds, creative art design, narrative-driven gameplay, and tendency to push the graphical power of its hardware to the absolute limits made Final Fantasy the gold standard of Japanese role-playing games. Despite selling well in Japan, Square struggled to find a market in the West. Working closely with Nintendo, Square, as a third-party developer, was more or less at the mercy of their corporate overlords. Nintendo was notorious for the control it exerted over third-party developers, and since they believed there simply wasn't much of a market for JRPGs outside of Japan, they rarely took the steps necessary for localization. One of the causes of this was the very game Square had tried to emulate, Enix's Dragon Quest released in North America as Dragon Warrior in 1989, and Nintendo produced hundreds of thousands of copies, anticipating it to be the big seller of the 1989 Christmas season. It wasn't. By 1990, Nintendo had so many unsold copies they began giving them away for free to new subscribers of Nintendo Power. Burned by Dragon Warrior's underperformance, Nintendo was disinclined to put much effort into localizing additional JRPGs. The original Final Fantasy did receive a North American release in 1990, and even sold 100,000 copies more than it had in Japan. Nevertheless, Final Fantasy II did not receive a North American release, even though Square had begun a localization effort. No localization was attempted at all for Final Fantasy III. Final Fantasy IV came to North America in 1991 for the Super Nintendo, but the localization suffered somewhat from Nintendo's restrictive censorship practices. Worse still, Final Fantasy IV was released in North America as Final Fantasy II. This inconsistent naming convention continued with Final Fantasy VI, released in 1994 as Final Fantasy III. All this came to a head when Final Fantasy VII was released internationally as Final Fantasy VII, causing non-Japanese fans to wonder what happened to the three other games. While all titles eventually received North American releases, the confusion persisted for years. James Rolfe made a video about this in 2006, and it remains one of the biggest naming kerfuffles in video game history. Originally, Final Fantasy VII was to be released on the Nintendo 64. As usual, Square wanted to push the graphical limits of its hardware, and with the next generation of consoles, a move to 3D seemed like the obvious choice. To see what a 3D Final Fantasy game might look like, Square released a tech demo in 1995, featuring 3D models of Terra, Locke, and Shadow from Final Fantasy VI participating in a turn-based battle. Yet almost immediately, Square found themselves frustrated by the limitations of the N64's cartridge-based system. The cartridges lacked memory, which forced Square to make cuts to environments, graphics, and even text dialogue. So, in 1996, Square publicly announced that after 10 years of working with Nintendo, Final Fantasy VII would be released exclusively on the Sony PlayStation. Square's decision to jump ship was a risky one. Since the 1980s, the home video game market had been dominated by Nintendo, and to a lesser extent Sega. Many companies had tried, and failed, to release competing systems over the years. Aligning with Sony was by no means a sure bet, and Square knew it. At first glance, the PlayStation was a bit lacking compared to its rivals. At 32 bits, it had only half the processing power of the N64, and its RAM and graphical capabilities were noticeably less than those of the Sega Saturn. What it did have was format, versatility, and price. Like the Saturn, the PlayStation used compact discs rather than cartridges. This meant that games released on the PlayStation could have significantly more content and detail than those on the N64, despite the N64's superior hardware. The Saturn had this advantage too, but the PlayStation had another trick up its sleeve. The Saturn used an internal hard drive to save games, while on the N64 most games were saved onto the cartridge itself. The PlayStation used external memory cards, and since more memory cards could always be purchased, there was essentially no limit to how many save files a PlayStation owner could have. This also meant that game data was transferable across multiple disks. With the PlayStation, games were no longer constrained by the limitations of a single piece of media. As with memory cards, the CD format meant there was, in essence, no limit to how big a PlayStation game could be. It could always be split across more disks. Many PS1 classics, like Metal Gear Solid and Resident Evil 2, took advantage of this, as did all three PlayStation-exclusive Final Fantasies. As for the console's price, well, at 1995's Electronic Entertainment Expo, Sega announced that the Saturn would retail for $399. Sony offered just 3 words in response.
$299.
In addition to all this, the PlayStation had Sony's war chest at its disposal. To ensure their console did not meet the same fate as the CDI or Intellivision, Sony launched an enormous marketing campaign, extolling the maturity of the PlayStation as compared to the kiddie toys made by Sega and Nintendo. These ads are an absolute treasure trove of edgy 90s tood.
Excuse me. My heart is beating. You are so totally whipped.
I'm Brad. Let's ride a bicycle bill for two. Then we can go to the potpourri store and then go buy sheets.
Would you rather be at home shooting a bazooka or watching a chick flick?
Chick flick, bazooka. Chick flick, bazooka.
Let me in, Brad.
Who's that?
Let me in. Brad.
I don't know.
Brad.
Still, Sony was starting from scratch. Nintendo had Mario. Sega had Sonic. Both companies had established fan bases, willing to shell out hundreds of dollars just for the chance to play the next installment of their favorite franchise. If Sony wanted to compete, it would need a killer app. Final Fantasy VII was that app. Sony dumped an unprecedented $100 million into marketing it, and for the first time ever, a Final Fantasy title would be released in Europe. Sony's ads focused on the cinematic quality of the game, providing vague references to the story and showing off the very impressive, for the time, fully animated cinematics.
Beyond the edge of reality lies a story of ultimate conquest, a story of war and friendship, a story of a love that can never be, and a hatred that always was. And now, the most anticipated epic adventure of the year will never come to a theater near you. Final Fantasy VII.
These commercials ran on primetime programs like The Simpsons, Conan O'Brien, and even Monday Night Football. In print, the game is promoted with massive, double-splash ads extolling the game's graphical intensity, with copy such as, "It's to a human what headlights are to a deer," and "You can actually hear your pupils dilate." One notorious ad took direct aim at Nintendo, reading, "Someone please get the guys who make cartridge games a cigarette and a blindfold." Sony was going all in on Final Fantasy VII. Now it was up to Square to deliver. By this point, Square had been making Final Fantasy games for a decade, and was releasing them at an almost yearly pace. While there was some variation in quality, the games were reliable sellers, and often garnered critical praise. Most of the games followed a similar formula. A ragtag group of heroes set out to save the world from some mystical evil power, and there was usually magic, crystals, and airships involved, plus a guy named Sid. The setting was medieval high fantasy, the graphics two-dimensional, the combat turn-based. Square had an established formula that produced reliable results, and few would begrudge them for doing more of the same. But Final Fantasy VII took nearly all these conventions and threw them out the window. The first and most noticeable shift was in the graphics. Every game in the series up to that point had utilized a top-down, 2D perspective. The detail of the characters and environments had improved over the years, but the basic look of Final Fantasy remained the same. With 7, the game would use fully three-dimensional models moving about a fully three-dimensional world. The blockiness of these models have turned into something of a running joke, and even for the time they were a bit crude compared to other 3D games. Nevertheless, the jump in graphical quality between Final Fantasy VI and Final Fantasy VII was nothing short of extraordinary. A misconception I had when first playing this game, and which persisted far longer than I'd care to admit, was that the entire game used 3D computer graphics. In fact, one of the things that allowed Square to have 3D models in the first place was the use of pre-rendered backgrounds. With the exception of the overworld, nearly every environment in Final Fantasy VII is a static image, occasionally augmented with rudimentary animation effects. Beneath these static images are invisible pathways on which the player-controlled character models can move. The use of pre-rendered backgrounds allowed Square to create incredibly detailed environments without using up too much processing power. Pre-rendered backgrounds became a hallmark of the series, being utilized in Final Fantasy VIII, IX, and even X on the PlayStation 2. While often derided, the game's models have, to my mind at least, a certain level of emotive charm. Like silent film actors, they move with exaggerated expressiveness, shaking their fists when angry, conspicuously sweeping their hair when flirting. Every character has a unique way of walking and running, which informs their personality. And some of the most emotionally resonant scenes of the game occur when there is no dialogue at all, and the characters express themselves entirely through their movement. While the character models may have been somewhat underwhelming, the pre-rendered cutscenes were not. Square gained a reputation in the late 90s for filling its games with pre-rendered cinematics, sometimes to an excessive degree. 1998's Parasite Eve, marketed as the cinematic RPG, had no fewer than 40 cutscenes, while Xenosaga had one that was over half an hour in length. This is nothing compared to Hideo Kojima at his worst, but still. Final Fantasy VII used cutscenes more sparingly, sprinkling them in at pivotal plot moments. One which has been emulated time and again is the opening, wherein a field of stars fades away to reveal the face of a young woman, Aerith. We follow her as she walks down an alley to an open street, and here the camera pulls back into a long, gloriously detailed shot that reveals the whole of Midgar, the futuristic cyberpunk city where the first 5 hours of the game take place. The music swells, the title card flashes, and the camera zooms in on an entirely different part of the city, seamlessly transitioning from cutscene to gameplay. It's impressive even today, and the remake replicates this sequence almost shot for shot. Granted, some of the details have not aged all that gracefully. Aerith's eyes are flat images superimposed on her face. Note how her pupils don't move when she turns her head. Her body is made of disparate, solid shapes. You can see the gap between her legs and torso when she stands up. But remember, this was 1998, just 2 years after Toy Story. For something like this to run on a console was mind-blowing. For many gamers, these cinematics were what elevated Final Fantasy VII above other video games. Rather than a cartoonish kid's toy, the game looked and felt like a Hollywood movie, and this was entirely by design. Development was split between Square's offices in Tokyo and Los Angeles, with the LA team using the area's connection to the movie industry to bring in special effects experts. The game's budget was in excess of $40 million, and more than 200 individuals worked on it over a span of 2 years. It was, by far, the largest and most expensive video game ever made up to that point. Some have even called Final Fantasy VII the world's first AAA game. Whether that's a good thing or not is up to the viewer to decide. The game's budget is especially apparent in its battle screen, which is one of the reasons it managed to impress Western audiences to a degree previous JRPGs rarely had. The first Final Fantasy games, and most JRPGs up to that point, utilized battle screens that were rather static. The player characters lined up on one side, the enemies on the other, and the player issued a variety of commands to resolve the conflict. There had been battle animations in Final Fantasy since the beginning, but unless you knew what was going on, unless you had an understanding of what all those flashing numbers meant, they were not especially exciting to watch. They were not cinematic. That all changed with Final Fantasy VII. Now the battles took place in little 3D arenas modeled to look like the surrounding environment. In them, 3D models duked it out with fully animated movements, and a few palette-swapped enemies aside, the variety of enemies, environments, and animations on hand was incredible. Every one of the 9 playable characters has a completely unique moveset for everything from basic attacks to the casting of spells to the issuing of limit breaks, the game's ultimate attacks. And since these battles took place in 3D environments, the camera could move and swoop, changing angle and position to emphasize the drama of the combat. For the first time in series history, battles looked exciting. So, the game had impressive graphics. But lots of games have had impressive graphics over the years. Almost every new console releases with a handful of tech demos that show off the system's graphical power but offer little in terms of gameplay. Why did this graphically impressive game make a lasting impact? Let's take a look at how it plays. Final Fantasy VII's player interactions can be broadly broken down into 2 categories: exploration and combat. In exploration, the player-controlled character, usually Cloud, moves about the pre-rendered backgrounds and overworld map, encountering monsters, discovering new locations, finding items, and initiating dialogue with NPCs. There's plenty to discover, with items and Easter eggs scattered throughout. The pre-rendered backgrounds are universally impressive, but getting around them can be a bit of a chore. Since the background image is static, the camera angle is fixed, and the perspective can change, sometimes drastically, between one background and the next. Having to adjust controls with each new screen can be disorienting, and it's not always clear which parts of the environment are interactive and which are not. Is this ladder climbable? Does this door lead somewhere? There is the option of turning on a guidance system of sorts, which marks all the interactive parts of the screen, but the fact that such a system was necessary demonstrates that these pre-rendered backgrounds are perhaps not as easily navigable as they should be. In terms of combat, the game created a brand new battle system based around the use of magical orbs called materia. Final Fantasy's battle system is one that is constantly evolving, with mechanics being tweaked, added, or removed with every game. In Final Fantasy VII, nearly every power and ability comes from equipping materia. Some materia allow the casting of spells or the performance of abilities, while others provide passive effects or only work in conjunction with other materia. There are even materia that allow the summoning of huge mythical creatures that inflict massive damage at the expense of massive magic points and a massive amount of time. Seriously, the animation for Knights of the Round is over a minute long and cannot be skipped. Each character can only equip a certain number of materia orbs, and so the player is constantly having to think about which to equip and which to leave out. Complicating matters further is that materia levels up just like characters, and at certain thresholds they may unlock new abilities or more powerful spells. In addition to thinking, what can I do now, the player must also think, what might I be able to do in the future? Do you equip a maxed out materia with its powerful abilities, or do you slot in a weaker one to level it up? On paper, the materia system is incredibly complex and nuanced, allowing for an almost endless variety of playstyles. It would be a deep and strategic system, if not for the fact that the game is just a little too easy. When I first played Final Fantasy VII as a kid, I understood very little about the materia system other than the summons are cool and do lots of damage. During my first playthrough, I didn't even know what linked materia slots did, or what blue materia was for. I played the game about as haphazardly as could be, and yet I beat it without too much difficulty. Now when I replay it, game orders are a practical impossibility. Regular enemies rarely do enough damage to matter, most bosses are more damage sponge than strategic challenge, only a few status effects seem to really do anything, though there are exceptions. And during a recent playthrough, I realized I had beaten the entire first disc without ever having used a restorative item in combat. There is something to be said for making a game approachable to a wide audience. I almost certainly couldn't have beaten it as a kid if the combat system were as complicated as that in, say, Pillars of Eternity. But given how little of a challenge most of the combat is, investing the 50 or so hours needed to complete the game can feel like a hollow experience. There's also the issue that since everything is tied to materia, none of the characters really play all that differently from each other. Almost any character can fill any role if given the right equipment. The only real difference comes from their limit breaks. Otherwise, the various party members play more like interchangeable skins rather than individual characters each tailored for a specific task. These are all just minor nitpicks though. Final Fantasy VII's graphics have aged better than those of many other early 3D games, and the pre-rendered backgrounds still hold a certain visual power. The combat, while not all that challenging, is engaging, and the aforementioned materia system allows players a huge variety of ways to dispatch enemies. Yet the true strength of Final Fantasy VII, the element that makes it stand out in the hearts and minds of so many, is its story. John Carmack famously said that story in a video game is like story in a porn movie. It's expected to be there, but it's not that important. Most video games throughout the 80s and 90s had some semblance of a story, and it was usually something simple like an international fighting tournament or an alien invasion. Video game characters were one-dimensional and unchanging, tending to express themselves more through character design than action or dialogue. To be sure, these rudimentary narrative elements added depth to the gameplay and helped the player get invested in what they were doing, but few would argue that Street Fighter or Contra presented a deep and complex narrative. Final Fantasy VII was different. Like all role-playing games, it had an above-average emphasis on storytelling. Unlike other role-playing games, it went far beyond the basic tropes of the genre. To explore how Final Fantasy VII tells its story, let's start at the beginning. The opening cinematic commences with swirling footage of what we think is a field of stars. After about a minute, the camera pulls back, revealing the face of a young woman, Aerith. The camera cuts, and we see that the star field is in fact the ghostly emanations of a broken pipe, running along the wall of a dilapidated-looking building. The young woman, with green eyes, the same color as the energy leaking from the pipe, rises and walks towards us. As she emerges into the open, we see that her character design is at odds with the world around her. Everyone else is dressed in drab colors, and the buildings are dark and oppressive looking, but she is dressed in bright pastels of pink and red. She is clearly apart in some way from this world she inhabits. As the camera zooms out, the world that has been tenuously established so far is revealed in its entirety. We are in Midgar, a large, futuristic city awash in the same green glow as the pipe Aerith was just looking at. Before the title card even appears, many elements of world building have been introduced, and the player's appetite for more has been thoroughly whetted. After this opening sequence, the game begins in earnest. A train arrives at an industrial-looking station and several figures, likely rebels of some kind due to their red bandanas, emerge and dispatch a pair of uniformed guards. Take a moment to appreciate just how effective the animation is despite the simplicity of the figures. Even from a distance, even with a camera that can't move, you completely understand what's going on. After the fight, another figure emerges, larger and more imposing. He impatiently waves to the top of the train, and a final figure, a young man with spiky blonde hair, leaps down with an unnecessary flip, a showy sign of performative coolness that is at the core of his character. The large figure, unimpressed, utters the first word of dialogue in the game. "Come on, newcomer, follow me." This is addressed to both the character and to us. As the first Final Fantasy game to get a broad release, many players would invariably be newcomers to the series. Before the player pushes a single button, so many narrative elements, from world building to characterization to even a hint of fourth wall breaking, has been established. Shortly after taking control of our blocky little avatar, we are attacked by two guards, and here we get the first taste of the game's 3D battle screen. In it, we learn two things. We are playing as an ex-soldier, all caps, and we are a total badass. The machine gun fire from the guards barely scratches our health bar, while we dispatch them with a single swipe from our massively oversized sword. Given that the target audience of Final Fantasy VII was adolescent males, this ex-soldier, all caps, whoever he is clearly meant to be an aspirational power fantasy, an if-I-was-older and cooler self-insert for the player, a very common trope in video games. Or at least, that's what we're supposed to think. Through expository dialogue, we are told the nature of our mission. We are Cloud, not just an ex-soldier, but an ex-soldier. Soldier, all caps, being the somewhat confusing name for an elite special forces unit employed by the Shinra Electric Power Company, the evil megacorporation that basically controls the entire world. The people we are fighting with are Avalanche, an underground resistance group led by Barret, the big fellow from before who told us to follow him. Cloud is a mercenary, helping Avalanche not because he believes in their cause, but because he is being paid. And what exactly is he being paid to do? Blow up a power plant. You see, the Shinra Electric Power Company makes electricity by extracting something called Mako from the planet. Mako is, quite literally, the planet's lifeblood, and so by making electricity from it, Shinra is, quite literally, draining the planet dry. Today, video games often tackle weighty themes, but Final Fantasy VII was something of a trailblazer in this regard. Most games up to that point presented black and white worlds of virtuous good guys and villainous bad guys. You knew how things were going to play out before you even hit the start button. Final Fantasy VII could have taken the easy route. It could have been a straightforward power fantasy, told a narrative in which the hero gets the girl, the bad guys get their comeuppance, and everyone lives happily ever after. It does none of these things. At times it leans into cliches with the aim of subverting them, but the story Final Fantasy VII presents is neither comforting nor safe, and for an adolescent in the late 90s, that was something of a revelation. Video games have often been scapegoated as the cause of societal woes, from accusations of arcades being fronts for drug dens, to the media never failing to point out that the latest school shooter enjoyed playing Doom, or Call of Duty, or Fortnite. In the 1990s, video games were under attack, with activists like Jack Thompson fighting tooth and nail to convince Congress that they led to the corruption of children.
I'd like to be able to pass a law saying you can't produce this stuff anymore.
Final Fantasy VII, a video game that addressed issues like environmentalism, corporate greed, identity, duty, sacrifice, and love, felt like a vindication. This was not some mindlessly violent time waster. This was a work of art, and that was made for us, the young people of the world, felt like a gift from the developers, a statement of, you are mature enough to handle this. Despite its massive budget and marketing campaign, playing Final Fantasy VII always feels like an intimate experience, shared between the player and the characters and no one else. Like a good novel, it feels like something written for you alone. After the initial bombing mission, more elements of the world are introduced. We learn that Barrett is father to a little girl named Marlene, who is very cute. We learn that Avalanche is headquartered in the basement of a bar owned by Tifa, Cloud's childhood friend. We meet Aerith, the girl from the opening cinematic, and learn that she is the last surviving member of the Cetra, or Ancients, a near-extinct race of magic users who could communicate with the planet. We meet President Shinra, the de facto world leader, and his bevy of cronies, most of whom are either cruel or incompetent, or both. We meet Hojo, Shinra's lead scientist, who is perhaps the single most evil character in all of gaming. We even hear vague whispers of Sephiroth, a legendary soldier, long thought dead, who will serve as the main villain of the story. The plot unveils slowly, and through methods both direct and indirect, we learn the themes that are at the core of Final Fantasy VII. One of the game's most important themes is life, and the developers have gone on record saying as much. This theme is most overtly expressed in Mako Energy, also known as the Lifestream. In the logic of Final Fantasy VII, all living things, from plants to animals to humans, have a soul, a sort of divine spark that is infused within them at birth and leaves them at death. This life energy is tangible, presented as a glowing liquid that flows just beneath the surface of the planet. As this energy circulates, passing from one living being to the next, it grows in complexity, the accumulated thoughts and memories of all living things fusing into an interconnected planetary-wide system of wisdom and experience. Rather than being separate, individual entities, all life forms, including humans, are mere borrowers of this great life force, taking a piece of the life stream within themselves for a time before giving it back, adding the sum of their knowledge and experience to life as a whole. In Final Fantasy VII, the souls of your ancestors are in you, and in every other living thing. You have within you the essence of every bird and flower, every blade of grass, every germ and virus, hero and villain who ever lived, and when you die, a piece of you will be in everything that comes after. This game presents a world where, in a very literal sense, everything is connected, and where no living thing ever truly dies. Given how life is presented in the game, it makes the environmental exploitation of Shinra all the more sinister. When a coal company burns fuel for energy, it releases pollutants that affect the environment in indirect ways. Carbon dioxide traps heat from the sun, which leads to global warming, and this warming causes glaciers to melt and sea levels to rise. Depending on where you live or the time of year, the weather may become hotter or colder, drier or wetter. There may be a reduction in plant life or an overabundance of it. In the real world, the causes and effects of environmental degradation are hard to follow. Most things in the real world are, which is why coming up with actionable ways to fix our problems can seem like an insurmountable task. There are simply too many variables to look at. The Game Professor, in his very informative analysis of Final Fantasy VII, please see the link in the description, makes the astute observation that fiction, particularly fantasy and science fiction, can address real-world issues in ways that narratives grounded in reality cannot. A story about World War II that tries to present it as a noble struggle between good and evil will be hamstrung by the infinite vagaries of historical fact. That both sides had internment camps, that both sides killed civilians, that American, Japanese, German, Russian, British, and Italian soldiers all proved capable of committing the most heinous of human atrocities. In the real world, there are rarely good guys and bad guys. But in fiction, the rebels can blow up the Death Star and bring peace to the galaxy. Throwing a piece of jewelry into a volcano can end evil for all time. In a fantasy world, a fake world, themes and concepts important to us all can be explored unburdened by the baggage of reality. In telling a lie, we can learn the truth. Shinra is not just threatening the world through indirect climate change. It is bleeding it dry, literally, and the effects of this are immediate and undeniable. The area around Midgar and other Mako reactors is dead and desolate. You can see the line where the decay caused by Mako extraction starts and stops. The pollution from Mako reactors does not lead to lower fertility rates or increased incidence of cancer. It causes horrific mutations, turning those affected by it into monsters. Mako is not directly analogous to any real-world counterpart. It is not a direct stand-in for nuclear waste or global warming or carcinogenic chemicals. Rather, it is a metaphor to help us understand how global warming, how nuclear waste, how carcinogenic chemicals, how everything that causes the natural world to deteriorate should be viewed and understood as something bad, as something we should try to stop. This is not the only progressive theme the game puts forward. There is a recurring motif in Final Fantasy VII of the rich literally living above the poor. In Midgar, the lower city is a dilapidated slum, the soil sucked dry by Mako reactors, the people living in ramshackle huts and broken-down vehicles. Above them, supported by monolithic pillars, is a huge steel plate upon which the wealthy live in lavish luxury. Similar situations are seen in Junin, the Shinra naval base built over an old fishing village where, according to locals, the fish have started to die out, and the Gold Saucer, a garish theme park built over the ruins of a burnt-out town turned prison. Such messaging is not subtle, nor does it accurately reflect the real world. What it does is present themes of environmentalism and anti-capitalism clearly and unambiguously. It presents those themes in such a way that even a 12-year-old can understand. Nature is good, corporate greed is bad. It's a simple message, but one worth listening to, especially today. Another important theme is that of identity. Unlike many other video game characters, the cast of Final Fantasy VII is dynamic. Every playable character, and even a good number of non-playable ones, have an arc, a series of events that cause them to change over the course of the story. They learn things, they mature, they grow. The events of the plot don't merely advance the game, they drive and are driven by the actions of the characters. Nearly every character in Final Fantasy VII suffers from some kind of emotional trauma, some sense of guilt or loss or regret. All of them, at some point in the story, confront their pain, and refreshingly, doing so does not always lead to an immediate fix. For most of the main cast, their distress stems from a crisis of identity, an uncertainty about who they are, what they want, and where they belong. For teenagers and adolescents, particularly those in the 1990s, this sort of existential angst hit a nerve, and I think that's one of the reasons this game is so well remembered. To look at how Final Fantasy VII deals with identity, let's start with the first playable character to speak, Barret. Based on his character design alone, we get a sense of what he might be like, and his early dialogue does little to dissuade us of that initial impression. Barret is a 6'5", 300-pound black man with a machine gun grafted into his arm. It would be reasonable to assume he's a character like Carl Withers in Predator, or Terry Crews in The Expendables, the token black guy. A muscle-bound war machine there to do little more than shoot things, quip one-liners, and let the white protagonist take all the credit. Barret certainly leans into this trope, and he has been criticized by some as a racist caricature. Given his violent temper, broken speech pattern, and more than passing resemblance to Mr. T, these criticisms are not without merit. But as the story progresses, Barret evolves beyond a one-dimensional stereotype, revealing himself to be a character of surprising complexity and nuance. When we first meet Barrett, he is something of an antagonist. Cloud is the playable character, our avatar, and Barrett expresses an immediate dislike of him, of us. Barrett is passionate about saving the planet, but so dogmatic in his hatred of Shinra that it's hard to take him seriously.
Mako is the lifeblood of our world. The planet bleeds green like you and me bleed red. The hell you think's gonna happen when it's all gone, huh? Answer me! You gonna stand there and pretend you can't hear the planet crying out in pain? I know you can!
You really hear that?
Damn straight I do!
Get help.
As the first mission commences, Barrett joins our party as a playable character, and with him we face the game's first boss, the Guard Scorpion. While defeating the Guard Scorpion isn't much of a challenge, it can only be accomplished with Barrett's help. And here we see how video games can do character relationships perhaps better than in any other medium. Through gameplay itself, characters can form bonds with each other. If you will allow me a brief digression, in 2015's Metal Gear Solid V: The Phantom Pain, the main character, a mercenary named Snake, develops a quasi-romantic relationship with a female sniper named Quiet, who is unable to speak due to the presence of parasites in her vocal cords. If she speaks, the parasites will release a deadly virus that could destroy the world. Near the end of the game, Quiet and Snake are trapped behind enemy lines, and Snake is incapacitated, unable to radio for help. Quiet, in the culmination of her character arc, calls for rescue, knowing that by speaking, she will have to completely remove herself from human contact for the rest of her life. She will never be able to be with Snake, or anyone else, ever again. It's a moving scene, and it feels earned, despite the fact that Snake and Quiet have, over the course of the game, never exchanged a single word. How is this possible? Because their relationship develops through gameplay. Some of Metal Gear Solid's 5 missions are quite challenging, and with the help of Quiet, they become easier. There is a relationship meter that grows as more missions are carried out together, unlocking new abilities for Quiet and improving her skills. Just like in real life, doing things together creates affection, and after spending a good 30 hours with Quiet and coming to rely on her help, the knowledge that she will be gone forever hits hard and feels like a genuine loss. A very similar parallel happens in Final Fantasy VII, which we'll get to later. The reason I bring up Metal Gear Solid V is because the eventual softening of Cloud and Barrett's relationship feels similarly earned. Cloud and Barrett, in these and later missions, achieve their goals by working together. It is believable that Cloud would come to trust Barrett because you, the player, have come to trust Barrett. After blowing up the Mako reactor, Cloud and Barrett are separated. They reunite, with Barrett expressing vague concern for Cloud, albeit in a gruff way. After a little back and forth, we see a different side of Barrett, one that is thoughtful and intelligent, and totally at odds with the stereotype he's initially presented as. While taking a train back to Avalanche's headquarters, he explains the economic bifurcation of Midgar, with the rich living above and the poor living below. When Cloud asks why the poor don't simply move away, Barrett, not unkindly, says, "Don't know. Maybe because they got no money, or maybe because they love their land, no matter how polluted it gets." Cloud, now waxing philosophic himself, muses, "It's like this train. It can only go where its rails take it." Final Fantasy VII is filled with subdued moments like this, moments where the plot takes a break, and the characters are allowed to reflect on the themes of the story and their interpersonal relationships. Such downtime is an essential but underappreciated aspect of narrative fiction. A plot that chugs on relentlessly, or a movie with action scenes piled one on top of the other, is exhausting. Granted, too much downtime is boring, and in the hands of poor writers, such moments can be used to prop up weak plots or stretch a story out longer than it needs to be. Used properly, though, they can provide needed breathing room to allow the intention of the writer to flourish. Upon arriving at Avalanche's headquarters, Barrett introduces us to his daughter Marlene. Here, we get another subversion of expectation. Barrett is a father, and a pretty good one at that. He doesn't keep any secrets from Marlene. and she is clearly a central figure in his life. With her, Barrett's gruff exterior melts away, and he becomes an almost completely different person. Knowing this recontextualizes Barrett's apparently blind hatred for Shinra. Instead of a dogmatic zealot, he is a concerned parent, worried that environmental degradation will irreversibly damage the world his daughter will have to grow up in. I think that's something a lot of modern parents can relate to. About 10 to 15 hours into the game, we arrive at Corel, Barrett's hometown, and here we learn his backstory. Corel is extremely poor, with most residents living in tents, and merchants outright begging the player to buy something. It's as bad, if not worse, than the slums of Midgar. Barrett approaches a group of townsfolk, and before a single word is exchanged, one of them punches him in the face. The group then derides him, and blames him for the state of the town. So what did Barrett do? He reluctantly tells the party that, back in the day, Corel was a small coal mining town. As Mako energy swept the world, demand for coal plummeted, and the town's economy suffered. Shinra offered to build a Mako reactor in Corel, and Barrett supported this decision, even going so far as to convince his best friend, Dyne, that it was a good idea. The result was disastrous. An accident at the reactor was blamed on Corel, with Shinra moving in and destroying the entire town. Barrett and Dyne, who were away at the time, returned to find Corel burning, and were subsequently attacked by Shinra. During the attack, Dyne and Barrett each had a hand blown off, with Dyne apparently dying in the process. Barrett, in lieu of a prosthetic hand, had a gun grafted onto it instead, and with it, swore revenge on Shinra. If Barrett had merely been the victim of a Shinra attack, it would provide sufficient, if somewhat cliched, reasoning for his hatred of the company. But the fact that he actively encouraged the construction of the reactor, even going against the misgivings of his best friend, makes Barrett feel personally responsible for the evil Shinra has committed. Now, hopefully most of you watching this video have not been responsible for the destruction of your hometown. Yet who among us has not made a poor decision? One that has negatively affected not only ourselves, but our loved ones. Barrett, like almost every other character in the game, has flaws that are relatable, and that's what makes him a compelling character. But his arc doesn't end here. Not long afterwards, the party encounters Dyne, who survived the attack. Like Barrett, Dyne has grafted a gun onto his arm and sworn revenge against Shinra. That is where their similarities end. Both men went through the same tragedy, but they came out as drastically different people. Barrett, while angry and guilt-ridden, devoted himself to making a positive change in the world, even if his methods were at times misguided. He formed an organization whose goal was to destroy Mako reactors, not just to get revenge on Shinra, but to save the planet. Dyne, on the other hand, became bitter and despondent, seeking not to improve the world, not even to merely seek revenge on those who wronged him, but to destroy the world, to kill everyone and everything. He was so broken by the loss of his hometown and the apparent deaths of his wife and daughter that he came to view the world as irredeemable, something that could not and should not be saved. Barrett took his pain and directed it into something good. Dyne allowed his pain to break him, and in the end, became something even worse than Shinra. The confrontation between Dyne and Barrett is one of the more underrated dramatic moments in the game. We learn through dialogue that Marlene is in fact Dyne's biological daughter, not Barrett's, that Barrett found her as an infant in the ruins of Corel and raised her as his own. Dyne, up until this moment, believed Marlene to be dead, along with his wife, Eleanor. Barrett asks Dyne to join the party, to see Marlene, to fight the good fight and reclaim some semblance of what he was before. In response to this offer, Dyne says, "Then I guess I'll have to send her to see her mother." This is how lost he has become, how far from the path of virtue he has allowed his pain and hatred to take him. Dyne is a man beyond hope, broken beyond repair, and this same fate could have befallen Barrett so easily. Dyne and Barrett fight, with Barrett winning. He once again offers Dyne a chance at redemption, and Dyne, in perhaps the first moment of clarity since the destruction of Corel, says, "Even if I did go to her now, she wouldn't even know me. And what's more, these hands are a little too stained to carry Marlene." In what could be viewed as either a tragic end or a really messed up kind of atonement, Dyne gives Barrett his wife's locket and tells him to look after Marlene. He then hurls himself from a cliff. Whatever evil he might have inflicted in the future will not occur, but neither will any good he might have done. Barrett, this old wound rent open, falls to his knees, sobbing. "My hands aren't any cleaner. I shouldn't be able to carry Marlene either." And how can Barrett carry Marlene when he has turned one of his hands into an instrument of death? After this resolution, Barrett moves away from his more violent tendencies. He admits that his terrorist actions, which undoubtedly harmed innocent civilians, were wrong, even if his aims were just. He pledges to adopt a more peaceful, more focused approach to saving the planet. He is a man who matures throughout the story, who learns from his mistakes and becomes a better person for it. He is a good father, a devoted friend and ally, a brave warrior, and someone with enough internal fortitude to endure the greatest of hardships and come out all the better for it. Far from being a one-dimensional caricature, I think Barrett is something of a role model, the sort of person any adolescent youth would be lucky to grow up as, even if he is one that borrows a bit too heavily from pop culture cliches. Barrett's arc strongly explores the theme of identity as he struggles to find a balance between his many selves. This struggle is even more apparent in the character of Red 13. When we first meet Red 13, we are not quite sure what to make of him. Unlike the other characters we've met, Red is not human. He's a sort of dog-lion hybrid thing, and he can talk. He is, in fact, the only sentient, non-humanoid character in the game, and we eventually learn that he is, in all likelihood, the only surviving member of his species. We're introduced to Red 13 near the end of the Midgar section, in the laboratory of Hojo, Shinra's lead scientist. Hojo has captured Aerith, and the party has infiltrated Shinra's headquarters to save her. As the last surviving Cetra, Hojo wishes to research Aerith and her unique abilities, but fears he will not be able to complete the research within his lifetime, or hers. As such, he wishes to breed her, to create an offspring that will allow Shinra to continue their research. Ideally, this offspring should be long-lived, and so Hojo chooses Red 13, whose species is very long-lived, to be Aerith's unwilling mate. Hojo does some pretty messed up things in this game. Red 13 doesn't go through with it, of course. The moment he's released into Aerith's cell, the party shows up to free her. Red escapes and immediately attacks Hojo, but stops short of killing him. With the Shinra building on full alert, he agrees to help the party, even though he, quote, doesn't like two-legged things. After escaping from Midgar, Red 13 agrees to accompany the party as far as Cosmo Canyon, his hometown, but no further. He clearly feels no loyalty to these people, even though they pretty much saved him from a lifetime of being experimented on by an immoral whack job. So, why is Red 13 so standoffish? We get two answers to that when we arrive at Cosmo Canyon. The first is that, by the standards of his species, he is merely a teenager. His chronological age is 48, significantly older than the rest of the party, who are mostly in their early 20s. This, coupled with his mature vocabulary, soft-spoken intelligence, and abundance of battle scars, mark him as the wise old man of the group. Yet from a developmental standpoint, he is no different from the other young people he's been adventuring with. While the following point is not directly addressed in the game, the fact that Red 13 matures very slowly means that building lasting relationships would be difficult. Any human friend he made would quickly outgrow him. By the time they were going through puberty, Red would still be akin to a 5 or 6-year-old. By the time they are approaching middle age, Red would still be in the middle of his adolescence. As such, Red 13 is a very lonely individual, feeling as if there is no one in the world who truly understands him. And haven't we all felt that way from time to time? The second cause of Red 13's recalcitrance is that he is ashamed of his heritage. In Final Fantasy VII, all 9 playable characters can have their names changed by the player. Red 13 is unique in that he provides his canonical name in dialogue, saying, "Hojo has named me Red 13, a name with no meaning whatsoever to me. Call me whatever you wish." He makes no bones about the fact that he is hiding his true identity. When Barrett asks, "What are you?" Red simply responds, "I am what you see." He plays his cards very close to his chest, and this is because he's ashamed of who he is. Upon arriving at Cosmo Canyon, we learn that Red 13's true name is Nanaki. We also learn that he is the son of 2 warriors who defended Cosmo Canyon from an attack by a hostile tribe called the Gi. His mother died in battle, but his father, apparently, ran off, too afraid to fight. For this reason, Nanaki considers his father a coward, and as the name Nanaki was given to him by his father, his very name fills him with shame. Not long after, he left his hometown to find himself, as young people will, which led to his capture by Shinra. Nanaki is torn between 2 very divergent expectations. On the one hand, he is the son of his mother, and heir to a noble legacy as Cosmo Canyon's stalwart defender. On the other hand, he is the son of a deserter, a coward, and feels as if the stain of his father's shortcomings will be upon him forever. I think there's something relatable in this. For those with parents who are successful, it can feel like an immense burden to live up to the expectations set by them. For those with parents who have failed in some way, it can be easy to feel hounded by the fear that you will grow up to be just like them, that the sins of the father will inevitably become the sins of the son. Nanaki faces both anxieties at once. Yet as with Barrett, Nanaki finds his redemption. In Cosmo Canyon we meet Bugenhagen, Nanaki's adopted grandfather. Bugenhagen raised Nanaki after his parents' death, and instilled in him a love of knowledge and a respect for the needs of the planet. Bugenhagen is a scientist, a former Shinra scientist actually, who left the company after realizing how harmful Mako energy was. He moved to Cosmo Canyon, which had long been a center of lore and learning, and built for himself an observatory from which he studies the planet. This observatory, and all of Cosmo Canyon, is powered not by Mako, but by renewable energy sources like windmills and solar panels. Final Fantasy VII, despite its anti-corporate message, is not anti-science or anti-technology. It affirms that it is possible to live a modern, technologically advanced life in accordance with nature. When Bugenhagen learns of Avalanche's quest to save the planet, he implores Cloud, Nanaki, and a third-party member to accompany him to the caverns beneath town. There, Nanaki learns the truth of his heritage. His father, Seto, was no coward who ran from battle. During the attack on Cosmo Canyon, the Gi found a back entrance through the caverns, and Seto left the front line to defend the narrow passage by himself. This action saved Cosmo Canyon, even though Seto was killed in the process, his body turned to stone by the poisoned arrows of the Gi. He protected us, Bugenhagen says, and he is protecting us still. Why Nanaki was not told this when he was younger is poorly explained. We are only told that Nanaki's mother wanted the entrance of the cave to be sealed up and forgotten, presumably to prevent any other would-be attacker from knowing about it. In any case, upon seeing his father's petrified body standing like a sentinel, Nanaki embraces his heritage. Bugenhagen, who is convinced by his scientific research that the death of the planet is imminent unless Shinra is stopped, asks Nanaki to continue on with Cloud and the party. Bugenhagen says that he is very old and not long for the world, and that he is happy he got to reveal the truth to his grandson. Nanaki, now filled with resolve, tells Bugenhagen that he will help Cloud and will return to Cosmo Canyon as a true warrior. I am Nanaki of Cosmo Canyon, son of the warrior Seto. The shame of his father's mistaken identity shed, Nanaki embraces who he was always meant to be. And then, the petrified form of Seto begins to cry. And, cheesy as this scene may seem to an outsider, it always tugs at my heartstrings. If one of the strongest themes in Final Fantasy VII is that the dead are never truly gone, then this scene, even if it doesn't make a whole lot of logical sense, expresses that theme beautifully. Seto gave his life not just to defend Cosmo Canyon, but to defend his son. Nanaki is his blood, his legacy, his purpose not just as a guardian and a warrior, but as a father, just like Barrett. In seeing Nanaki become the brave and honorable man he must have always hoped he would, Seto's purpose as a father is fulfilled, and his tears are those of gratitude and joy. It's a shame the party keeps calling him Red 13 after this. The theme of identity is also expressed, albeit much less gracefully, in the character of Cait Sith, or Ketchi, depending on who you ask. Cait Sith is generally regarded as one of the worst members of Final Fantasy VII's main cast, and it's not hard to see why. In a game that tried very hard to adopt an edgier, grittier tone than the Final Fantasy games of yore, Cait Sith's character design is cute and cartoonish. An anthropomorphic cat riding atop a giant stuffed Moogle, his attacks are mostly toy-based, involving things like tin soldiers and squeaky hammers. It's all very kiddish, and doesn't match the tone of the rest of the game at all. It also raises a lot of unanswered questions about how he is viewed by the other members of the party. With Red 13, people acknowledge that the existence of a talking dog-lion hybrid thing is kind of weird, and a major element of his character is that he is a unique life form without any others like him. With Cait Sith, no comment is made at all about just how weird it is to have a talking cat riding around on a giant Moogle. In the manual, his profession is listed as Toysaurus, and he is described thusly. Cait Sith rides around on the back of a huge stuffed Mog he magically brought to life. Megaphone in hand, he is always shouting orders and creating dopey attacks. When Cloud first meets Cait Sith, he is working as a fortune teller at the Gold Saucer, a caustic parody of Disneyland and other amusement parks where patrons are financially exploited in the name of fun. There's plenty for the player to do at the Gold Saucer, but everything requires the purchase of a special currency that can only be used in the park and that won't be refunded if you leave. After offering several inaccurate but strangely foreshadowing fortunes, Cait Sith insists on joining the party. As a fortune teller, I can't help but think about this. If I don't see where it leads to, I won't be able to relax. When Cloud protests, Cait Sith responds with, "I'm coming with you no matter what you say." And that's it. Cait Sith is now a permanent member of the party. So, that alone would be pretty bad. But it gets even worse when we figure out just what this cat Moogle thing actually is. Cait Sith is a robot, being controlled by Reeve, a high-ranking Shinra executive who, uniquely for the company's leadership, expresses some concern for the everyday person. Cait Sith's whole purpose is to spy upon the party. When the party finds an item that might hold the key to saving the planet, Cait Sith steals it and hands it over to Shinra. He then reveals that he is holding Marlene hostage, and will presumably do very bad things to her if the party does not cooperate. Kidnapping a child is a pretty messed up thing to do. And if Cait Sith wants to have any sort of a redemption arc, he'll need to atone in a big way. And in a sense, he does. As the story continues, Cait Sith turns double agent, giving the party inside information on the goings-on at Shinra, and uses that information to help them subvert Shinra's plans. It's a noble effort, but perhaps not quite noble enough to make up for kidnapping Marlene. In terms of identity, Cait Sith works as a pretty good metaphor for Reeve's double life. Reeve is the real character here, not Cait Sith. He works as an executive for Shinra, a company committed to world domination and environmental destruction. Yet Reeve still holds a moral core. He seems to view his position at Shinra as that of gatekeeper or damage controller. By working from the inside, he might be able to dissuade Shinra from its worst impulses. Cait Sith's arc, so to speak, comes near the end of Disc 1 at the Temple of the Ancients, a location that holds the key to saving the world. The only way to get this key is to solve a series of puzzles that make the temple smaller and smaller until it is small enough to hold in one's hand. The person within the temple, solving the puzzles, would be crushed in the process. Reeve offers to perform this task himself and sacrifice
a robotic cat and Moogle that is immediately and unceremoniously replaced. This is presented as the culmination of Cait Sith's character arc, his redemption for being a Shinra spy, even though nothing is really lost in the process. As the game professor said, there is some narrative meat here in the sense that Reeves' Shinra puppet is destroyed through this act, thus symbolically breaking him of Shinra control and representing a sort of rebirth, but the way it's handled is not great. Reeves' real redemption, to my mind, comes early in Disc 2, in which he, using Cait Sith as his avatar, rescues Barrett and Tifa from execution at the hands of Shinra. He straight up assaults Scarlet, one of his fellow Shinra executives, thus placing his loyalty to the party in no uncertain terms. He takes on a much more prominent role throughout Disc 2, with his insider information being essential for the sizable portion of the game spent liberating materia from Shinra control. Near the end of Disc 2, he takes this one step further, helping the party sneak back into Midgar and take down Shinra once and for all. Reeve, with the help of Cait Sith, does more to dismantle Shinra than all the efforts of the rest of the party combined. Does this change the fact that Cait Sith is an embarrassingly designed character with terrible limit breaks and who threatened to harm a child? No. But I take it as evidence of Final Fantasy VII being a true work of art, that even the weakest mainline character in the game has more depth and nuance than even the leads of many other titles.
There are 3 additional playable characters that, while not quite as narratively rich as the others, deserve some consideration here: Cid, Yuffie, and Vincent. Cid Highwind is the last playable character to be introduced, not appearing until about 25 hours into the game. Despite his late appearance, he is an important figure in the story, serving as a catalyst for many events. When we first meet him, he is living in Rocket Town, a small village once serving as the launch site of Shinra's short-lived space program. The most prominent feature of this town is a dilapidated rocket, built to be the world's first manned spacecraft. Cid Highwind was to be the test pilot. When a mechanical assistant named Shira remained in the engine chamber for too long out of concern over a possibly faulty oxygen tank, and would thus be incinerated when the rocket fired, Cid aborted the launch. With the test flight an apparent failure, Shinra quickly scrapped the entire project. Cid spent the subsequent years as an angry, bitter man, often venting his frustration to Shira, who, out of a sense of duty, endured his anger. From a character perspective, Cid is interesting. I liked him a lot more as a kid than I do as an adult. As a kid, he was funny in a gruff sort of way. He had a weird way of walking, he swore all the time, he smoked and drank and told Cloud to sit his spiky-haired ass down and drink some goddamn tea. And his grumpiness, to a certain degree, is relatable. Cid is presented as a brilliant engineer and charismatic leader, well respected by those who work under him. He is also a man of high ambition, who through skill and hard work was given the opportunity to do something truly extraordinary. Yet his dream was denied due to the incompetence of underlings, the meddling of penny-pinching bureaucrats, and the indifference of visionless politicians who could not see the beauty in what he was trying to achieve. There's a certain Ayn Randian, or at least Reagan-esque quality to Cid's character. A great man who could do great things if only lesser men would get out of his way. Depending on what sort of person you are, there can be something appealing in that. However, when re-evaluating Cid from a modern perspective, his treatment of Shira is downright abusive. He belittles her with nearly every line of dialogue, and it would be one thing if this was merely the bitter vitriol of a man with a dream deferred. But as we see in a flashback, Cid's treatment of Shira has been the same since the beginning. While preparing the rocket for its test launch, Cid dismisses Shira's concern by saying, "You're not stupid, so be more efficient." That is not a nice thing to say, and the fact that it is later implied that Cid is in love with Shira and intends to marry her makes their relationship all the more problematic. As with the other characters, Cid has a redemption arc. Near the end of the game, he, Shira, and Cloud take the rocket into space. While in orbit, the oxygen tank Shira expressed concern about does indeed explode, trapping Cid beneath the rubble. Cid concedes that Shira was right, and after he is freed from the wreckage with Shira's help, his personality softens considerably, and he comes around to the fact that he cares for Shira and wants to spend the rest of his life with her.
There are many things to like about Sid. He's a brilliant engineer, having designed and built several aircraft, including the massive airship named after himself. He's a charismatic leader, respected by his flight crew, the people of Rocket Town, and his fellow party members, who elect him leader in Cloud's absence. Gameplay-wise, he's even a pretty good fighter. Sid remains a well-liked character, thanks in part to his technical acumen and gruff but lovable personality. That doesn't change the fact that there are some aspects of his character that are rather iffy. And this is precisely why it's always worth revisiting old works of art. We can learn from their successes, as well as their shortcomings. Yuffie and Vincent are two of the more enduring characters from Final Fantasy VII. Yuffie is perhaps better known for her appearance in the Kingdom Hearts franchise, while Vincent received his own spin-off game, albeit one that isn't particularly good. Many players consider Vincent or Yuffie to be their personal favorites. Vincent was mine. This is in spite of the fact that both of them are optional characters. The entire game can be played without ever encountering them. For this reason, their connection to the story is necessarily peripheral. Unlike Cloud and Aerith, or even Barret and Sid, the actions of Yuffie and Vincent do not inform the events of the plot directly. Rather, their respective character arcs serve to enhance thematic elements that are presented elsewhere in the game. Yuffie is the first optional character we meet. Usually. Through a somewhat convoluted process, she can join the party by encountering and defeating her in a forest and then answering a series of dialogue inputs correctly. As the designated thief of the group, Yuffie will run off and steal some of your money if you put in the wrong answer. She is a very feisty character, often expressing her opinion in a loud, acerbic way. There is a certain charm to this, but in many ways Yuffie is a stereotypical bratty kid, which makes sense given that she is just 16 years old, the youngest member of the party by far. Yet as with most stereotypes embraced in Final Fantasy VII, Yuffie's is undermined to serve a greater purpose. An event in the game's lore that is often referenced but never directly shown is the war between Shinra and Wutai. Wutai is an island nation heavily modeled off of feudal Japan. About 15 years before the events of the game, it was engaged in a war with Shinra that it ultimately lost. By that point, Shinra had conquered, either through direct military aggression or economic domination, most of the known world, with Wutai being one of the last holdouts. The anti-imperialist theming here is overt, especially given that this is a Japanese game and Wutai is based off of Japan, a country that was more or less forced into the modern world at gunpoint. In addition, the source of Shinra's power is Mako, which is partially modeled off of nuclear energy. The fact that Japan has a somewhat involved history with nuclear-equipped foreign adversaries makes the parallels almost blindingly obvious. After Wutai lost to Shinra, their economy was shattered. Shinra refused to build a Mako reactor, which was ostensibly the whole point of the war in the first place. While certainly good for the planet, it kept Wutai economically disadvantaged. This is an example of Final Fantasy VII complicating issues and refusing to give easy answers. It's not just Mako is bad. It's Mako is bad, but it could help the economy, and by refusing to build a reactor, Shinra has essentially doomed Wutai to technological inferiority, which could ultimately be a good thing because look at what happened to Midgar. But on the other hand, now we're at the mercy of foreigners with far more power than ourselves, and who's to say they won't make war upon us again, so we should try to get a Mako reactor. But if we do that, it might destroy the environment, and then we'd be in a worse position than we already are, and so on and so forth. Final Fantasy VII is a game that rarely offers easy answers. To rebuild Wutai, Godo, the country's leader and Yuffie's father, reshaped it into a tourist destination, an act that Yuffie views as selling out, especially since high-ranking Shinra officials make up the bulk of visitors. This dynamic of poor but beautiful countries being conquered by foreign powers and then being turned into tourist destinations is a recurring theme throughout history. If you don't believe me, type, "How did Hawaii become a state?" into Google. All of this recasts Yuffie in a clearer light. The manual describes her as a materia hunter, and throughout the game she expresses a strong desire to acquire materia orbs, even going so far as to steal them from the party. At first, this comes across as little more than an amusing character quirk, akin to Zell from Final Fantasy VIII loving hot dogs. Knowing the history of Wutai turns Yuffie's obsession into a legitimately sympathetic desire. In the world of Final Fantasy VII, materia orbs are weapons of immense power, and wieldable by almost anyone. They are something that could level the battlefield, were Wutai ever to come into conflict again with Shinra. In gathering materia for Wutai, Yuffie hopes to overthrow Shinra's domination, to free her homeland, and return it to a position of international respect. Unlike the game's other mainline characters, Yuffie's feelings and emotions are not universally relatable, at least not in the United States. While clearly modeled off of Japan's relationship to the West, Yuffie's character is that of a member of an oppressed culture, living unwillingly under the norms and expectations of a powerful outside force. This is something Japanese gamers would most likely be able to relate to. White, heteronormative American teenage males, maybe not so much. However, there are plenty of other Americans who might see something of themselves in the plight of Wutai and Yuffie's desire to fight back. In this sense, Yuffie is perhaps the game's strongest example of a minority character.
Finally, we come to Vincent, who despite being an optional character, holds pretty strong connections to the events of the main story. Vincent is, or was, a Turk, a member of Shinra's covert spy agency. The Turks are ostensibly charged with recruiting new members of Soldier, but as Cloud points out early in the game, they're also involved in a lot of dirty stuff. Spying, murder, you know. 4 Turk members, Reno, Rude, Elena, and Sung, serve as recurring antagonists throughout the game. These 4 characters have devolved into somewhat clownish figures in later iterations, but in the original game they are legitimately intimidating, and were among my personal favorites. Perhaps that's why I liked Vincent so much. He is an immortal, shape-shifting, super hot goth guy with lustrous black hair and skin so pale Jim Gaffigan would be envious. Design-wise, he's the epitome of 90s gothic chic, and an unquestionable forerunner to the sexy vampire craze of the mid-2000s. No wonder he's so popular. Indeed, the whole vampire angle is played pretty straight, at least initially. When we first meet Vincent, he is asleep in a coffin in the dungeon of a creepy mansion. And while that is undoubtedly cliched, how he got there and why he remains is not. As a bit of forewarning, we are about to dive into some rather dark territory, and this segment will deal with issues such as depression, domestic abuse, and suicide. About 30 years before the events of the game, Vincent was working security for a group of Shinra scientists. This group consisted of a young Hojo, the then head of Shinra's science division, Professor Gast, and a young research assistant named Lucretia. Those familiar with the Roman myth involving a young woman of the same name can probably guess that Lucretia's story does not end on a happy note. This group was stationed at a Shinra research facility, hidden in the basement of a mansion located in the small town of Nibelheim, the same town that, years later, would be the birthplace of both Cloud and Tifa. Within the mansion, Hojo, Gast, and Lucretia conducted research on a very bizarre specimen, a non-human entity discovered in the frozen wastes surrounding a massive meteoritic crater located near the North Pole. Legend had it this crater was formed around 2,000 years ago, when a calamity from the skies struck the planet, nearly ending all life. Professor Gast, who named the specimen Genova, believed it to be a Cetra and began researching its biology. A number of experiments were conducted, some of them morally dubious. Cells were extracted from Genova and injected into living organisms, and the results were intriguing. Organisms injected with Genova cells had great increases in both physical and mental acumen, to a point. Too many cells, and they would begin to suffer from horrific mutations. Exposure to Mako energy compounded these effects. Professor Gast, increasingly disturbed with the results of these experiments, withdrew himself from the project, but Hojo pressed on, and his discoveries eventually led to the Soldier program, wherein human recruits were exposed to Mako energy and, unbeknownst to them, injected with Genova cells to increase their combat capabilities. This means that as members of Soldier, both Cloud and Sephiroth have Genova cells within their bodies. Keep that in mind. So, what does any of this have to do with Vincent? During his time with the group, he developed romantic feelings for Lucretia, feelings that were, it is implied, partially reciprocated, but not fully. Lucretia ultimately rejected Vincent, choosing instead to pursue a relationship with Hojo. Hojo and Lucretia had a baby, and though it is implied she was heavily coerced, Lucretia agreed to let Hojo experiment on her unborn child, injecting it with Genova cells and exposing it to Mako energy. This caused immense physical pain to Lucretia, and upon its birth, her child was taken away to be experimented on further. Racked with guilt over her decision, Lucretia tried to take her own life, only to discover that she couldn't. The combination of Genova cells and Mako exposure had made her functionally immortal. And the name of her newborn baby? Sephiroth. The very Sephiroth who serves as the game's main antagonist. Vincent, understandably appalled by this turn of events, confronts Hojo, only to have Hojo shoot him, imprison him, and experiment on him, leading to Vincent's aforementioned immortality and shape-shifting abilities. Vincent, unable to absolve himself of the guilt he feels over his failure to protect Lucretia, and horrified by the monstrosity he has become, sequesters himself in the mansion's basement, where the party eventually finds him. After first telling them to leave him alone, Vincent reconsiders, and asks if their quest will lead him to Hojo. Cloud says it might, so Vincent agrees to join the party, swearing that when he finds Hojo, he will pay him back for all the harm he has done, both to Lucretia and himself. At first glance, it is easy to dismiss Vincent as a one-dimensional character, a very much of the time cool, edgy anti-hero, driven by a cliched desire to get revenge for the woman he loved. But as with Barrett, this sort of reading is reductive, and robs Vincent of much of his complexity. Vincent and Sid were among my favorite characters as a child, and while my view of Sid has changed over the years, my view of Vincent has not. As an adult, I find him, if anything, even more compelling than I did in 1997. To begin, Vincent is not really seeking revenge for his woman. Lucretia never had a romantic relationship with Vincent. She was never his. Quite often in fiction, when a female character rebuffs a male protagonist, he doggedly pursues her until she finally gives in to his romantic advances. And there are a lot of quotation marks around the word romantic in this context. Vincent, from what we are shown, does no such thing. He is certainly saddened by Lucretia's rejection, but he respects her enough to accept this decision. If she's happy, then I don't mind. He does intervene later on, but only after Hojo has shown himself to be an immensely abusive partner. But the real strength of Vincent's character is in how he serves as an illustration of what can happen when someone lets negative feelings overwhelm them. More importantly, he serves as a rather practical example of how to pull oneself out of a depressive slump. I think all of us have, from time to time, felt depressed, felt that we are failures, that we have let our loved ones down. In our darkest moments, perhaps we've wanted to just shut ourselves away from the world, or even go a step beyond. For many, such feelings are occasional and fleeting. For others, they are persistent and incapacitating. Vincent is an example of the latter. In failing to protect Lucretia, he has come to view himself as an abject failure, poisonous to anything he touches. As with Lucretia, suicide is not an option, so the next best thing is to spend the rest of his life laying in bed and feeling sorry for himself. As a child or young teenager, such brooding can seem cool, an expression of maturity and world-weariness. As adults, most of us realize that there is nothing romantic in being immobilized by emotional pain. When Cloud approached Vincent's coffin, he broke through the miasma of self-hatred that Vincent had been cultivating for almost 3 decades. At first, Vincent is resistant, telling Cloud and the party to leave, saying, "This mansion is the beginning of your nightmare." When Cloud replies, "You can say that again,
Vincent asks, "Do you know something?" Right away, he shows himself to be open to new information. He has not yet completely shut himself off. Cloud recounts the plot up to this point, and Vincent asks if their quest will eventually lead to Hojo. Cloud says it might, and for Vincent that's good enough. He then becomes a member of the party. I like this sequence because it shows that, despite Vincent's intense feelings of guilt, despite the fact that he has spent more than a quarter century stewing in negative emotions, he is not beyond hope. When A Way Out appeared, Vincent took it. Revenge may not be the noblest of callings, but any therapist will tell you that when mired in the throes of depression, there's no such thing as a bad reason to get out of bed and do something. Vincent thus offers a hopeful and even practical model of how to cope with negative emotions. Get up, get out, have a goal, and work towards it. If Vincent can pull himself from the maw of self-hatred, so can the rest of us. Regrettably, the same cannot be said of Lucretia. Late in the game, in a secret and easy-to-miss cutscene, the party finds Lucretia, who, like Vincent, has sequestered herself away from society. Whereas Vincent feels guilty over his failure to protect her, she feels guilty over her failure as a mother. Ever since he was born, I never got a chance to hold him, not even once. You can't call me his mother. That is my sin. She asks Vincent if he has any news of Sephiroth, the son she's never held, the son she dreams about almost every night. And Vincent tells her that Sephiroth is dead. Was that the right thing to do? Maybe, maybe not. Life is full of moments where there seem to only be wrong choices and worse choices. But Vincent, then as in the past, tried to choose the lesser evil. Don't we all? Vincent and Lucretia, like Barrett and Dyne, show opposite views of what can happen when people are exposed to emotional trauma. Barrett used the destruction of Corel as motivation to found an organization that fought for the health and future of the planet. Vincent used his anger at Hojo as motivation for pulling himself out of depression. Dyne allowed the pain of Corel's destruction to turn him into a violent, amoral psychopath, so full of hatred that he would murder his own daughter. Lucretia allowed her guilt to break her to the point where she attempted suicide, and when that proved unfeasible, shut herself away from everything and everyone. It's always been a headcanon of mine that after the end of the game, Vincent returned to Lucretia's cave, rekindling his relationship with her, slowly coaxing her out of her depression and bringing her once more to the land of the living. He strikes me as the type of person who would attempt such a thing. Alas, nothing like this is shown in game, and so we are left with an exploration of guilt, depression, and emotional coping that is far more nuanced and compelling than a video game from 1997 has any right to be. We've now covered most of the main cast of Final Fantasy VII. We've seen how each of them copes with anger, pain, frustration, and desire. But we have not yet explored the game's leads, so to speak. The four characters who are at the center of the plot and whose actions drive the story. These four characters are Cloud, Tifa, Aerith, and Sephiroth. Sephiroth, as mentioned before, is the game's primary antagonist. He is also one of the most popular characters ever to come out of the franchise, and rivals Cloud in the number of appearances he has made in other media. It's not hard to see why Sephiroth is so popular. Simply from a visual perspective, he's extremely well designed. A well-designed character immediately informs the viewer, or gamer, of that character's personality. And Final Fantasy VII is a masterclass in good design, with even minor characters looking the part of their intended roles. President Shinra, for instance, is old, mustachioed, obese, and cigar-munching, the very embodiment of capitalist greed. His son Rufus is younger, svelte, immaculately dressed, yet just as dangerous as his father, the same old greed, slathered with a fresh coat of hair gel. The four Turks all wear the same navy blue suit, but the way they wear it differs. Reno's appearance is unkempt and carefree, and this reflects his cockiness and devil-may-care attitude. His partner Rude is formal and buttoned up, indicating his stoic, no-nonsense approach to the job, and his eyes are constantly hidden behind a pair of dark sunglasses, expressing an aloof and taciturn personality. Then, of course, there's Sephiroth. Character-wise, Sephiroth is a chameleon, and his design, which is filled with contradictions, expresses this. His body is lithe, yet muscular. His clothing is tight, but also flowing. His long hair expresses femininity. Indeed, it's intentionally designed to mirror Aerith's, but there's a certain masculine element to it, and its silvery color could be the result of either advanced age or youthful vibrance. Sephiroth's appearance is ethereal in some ways, ageless and androgynous, like a Tolkienian elf. Yet while elves usually express a sort of sadness beneath their external beauty, beneath Sephiroth's attractive exterior is a soul of pure malice. Many characters in Final Fantasy VII have green eyes, all of them a slightly different shade. Aerith, as a Cetra, has eyes that are light and vibrant, the color of springtime grass or the buds of flowers. They express beauty, renewal, life. For members of Soldier, green eyes are the direct cause of Mako exposure, and so they have a somewhat fluorescent, artificial sheen to them. Cloud, for reasons that will be explored later, has had less Mako exposure than other members of Soldier, and so the green of Mako energy has blended with his eyes' natural blue, creating something akin to aquamarine, the color of a stormy sea, or a sky full of clouds, expressing his turbulent and unsettled personality. The eyes of Sephiroth, by contrast, are deeply hued and intense. There's cunning in them, intelligence, ill intent. His pupils are narrow slits, resembling those of a snake or cat. The eyes of a predator. But one only notices these details if they look closely. Sephiroth's malleable appearance makes it easy for him to pass as one of the good guys. We first meet him in a flashback, wherein Cloud explains that 5 years before the events of the main game, he went on a mission with Sephiroth to repair a leaking Mako reactor located near Cloud and Tifa's hometown of Nibelheim. At this point, Sephiroth is shown to be friendly and affable. He asks Cloud about what it's like to revisit his hometown. He talks about his own past. He poses for photographs with the locals and even cracks a few jokes. He is stern and commanding when he needs to be, but overall he comes across as everything a starstruck teenager from a rural town would like to emulate. He's a celebrity who lives up to his reputation. Being a legendary soldier, one would expect Sephiroth's fighting abilities to be impressive, and they are. As with the relationship between Cloud and Barret, the way Final Fantasy VII expresses Sephiroth's power is something that could only be done in a video game. And as with Cloud and Barret, it does it better than in almost any other medium. For a very brief period during the flashback, Sephiroth is a playable character. Sort of. He accompanies Cloud on the battle screen, but it's impossible to issue him commands. Sephiroth plays according to his own will, and you can't change his equipment or materia on the menu screen either. This does a good job of setting Sephiroth apart from the player, while simultaneously giving them a chance to view his combat prowess via the game's mechanics. I am by no means the first person to point this out, but it is an absolutely brilliant bit of ludonarrative storytelling that warrants revisiting. The first encounter with Sephiroth as a party member occurs during the drive to Nibelheim, when the truck they are traveling in is attacked by a dragon. This dragon is far beyond anything the player has yet faced. The toughest enemies encountered so far can inflict perhaps 100 points of damage per attack. The dragon inflicts over 500, more than enough to kill Cloud with a single blow. Yet this is nothing compared to what Sephiroth can do. Each attack from Sephiroth deals damage in excess of 3,000 hit points, numbers way beyond anything seen in the game so far. This dragon, practically invincible to the player at their current level, is killed by Sephiroth in as little as one attack and never more than 2. The difference in power between Cloud and Sephiroth, between the player and Sephiroth, is astronomical, and this is expressed entirely through gameplay. After arriving in Nibelheim, The party sets off to Mount Nebel, where the malfunctioning Mako reactor is located. Tifa accompanies the party as guide, though she does not appear as a playable character in combat, which I think is a bit of a lost opportunity, given that young Cloud gets to fight and the battle screen allows up to 3 playable characters. In any case, as the party ventures through Mount Nebel, they encounter groups of enemies that, while not quite as strong as the dragon, are still far more advanced than those found in the starting areas of the game. Sephiroth dispatches them easily, this time using maxed out endgame level materia. What I like about this section is that it sets up an eventual payoff. Later in the game, the party arrives at Mount Nebel and encounters these very same enemies, though by this point, they are high enough level to deal with them. As such, Sephiroth's overpoweredness serves 2 narrative purposes. First, it re-emphasizes the strength of Sephiroth and the weakness of Cloud. Second, it sets up the player's eventual growth in power. By the time the player revisits this area, what was once overwhelming is now manageable. It suggests, ever so slightly, that maybe the player has a chance of beating Sephiroth after all. Within the reactor, Sephiroth quickly finds and remedies the problem. A valve has been loosened. Cloud asks why it was loosened, and while this point is never explicitly made, it is implied that the entire thing was a setup by Hojo in order to reveal the true origins of Sephiroth to his son. Sephiroth tells us earlier that he's been told by Hojo and Gast, who served as sort of dueling father figures to him, that his mother was a woman named Jenova. Within the Nibelheim reactor is a sealed door bearing the inscription, Jenova. There is no way this could have been an oversight by Shinra Command. Someone wanted Sephiroth to be there. Also within the chamber are several pods in which human test subjects have been placed and exposed to very high levels of Mako energy, mutating them into monsters. Sephiroth, upon learning this information, asks if he too is made this way, if his seemingly superhuman combat prowess is a result of him not being human. Cloud tries to reassure him that he is human, but Sephiroth does not seem persuaded. He then lashes out in violence, repeatedly striking the pods with his sword. There is a lot to unpack in this scene. On the one hand, Sephiroth's reaction could be seen as a completely reasonable response to what must be a rather intense emotional crisis. On the other, it could be viewed as a foreshadowing of Sephiroth's worst violence to come. Thirdly, it could be seen as the final expressions of his humanity, the death throes of the good person he might have been if things had gone differently. I adhere to this final interpretation. Sephiroth was not born. He was made. Hojo experimented on him, in utero. Sephiroth was taken away from his mother at birth and has never known parental affection. His father treated him not as a son, but as a science experiment, and later, as a war machine. We are never told how many people Sephiroth killed during the war with Wutai, but it was probably a lot. After the war, Sephiroth became a celebrity, treated as a war hero. Throughout his entire adult life, the notion has been reinforced time and again that his worth as a person stems from his capacity to commit violence. And Sephiroth never had a say in any of this. From the moment he was conceived, every decision has been made for him. Sephiroth is unquestionably a villain, but it makes one wonder that if things had gone just a little bit differently, might he have ended up as someone else, as someone better. After the reveal in the Mako reactor, Cloud and Sephiroth return to town and stay in the very same mansion where Gast, Hojo, and Lucretia did their research. Again, Sephiroth's presence here could not have been an oversight. While there, Sephiroth pores through Gast and Hojo's research notes, slowly learning the reality of what he is. And then one day, laughing maniacally, he reveals to Cloud what he's discovered. Sephiroth believes that he is a Cetra. The Cetra, known as Ancients by laypeople, were an interstellar race who traveled through the cosmos, visiting planet after planet, seeding it with life, nurturing it to a state of equilibrium, and then moving on. It was prophesied that at the end of their journey, they would reach a place of supreme happiness called the Promised Land. But those that disliked the journey appeared, Sephiroth explains. Those who stopped their migrations, built shelters, and elected to live an easier life. Those who became human. Sephiroth calls Cloud a traitor and says that he and all humans took from the planet and the Cetra without giving one whit in return. He understands Jenova to be a Cetra, understands himself to be her offspring, and understands his rightful position as heir to the planet, mandated to rule over it and all of its inhabitants. And his first order of business is to cleanse the world of its human infestation. But there is one thing here that Sephiroth does not understand. The reason the Cetra are all but extinct is that long ago there was a calamity from the sky which threatened to destroy the planet. Only by sacrificing themselves did the Cetra save the planet from annihilation. Gast, Hojo, and Sephiroth all believed Jenova was a Cetra, but she was, in fact, that very calamity from the sky. So, not only was Sephiroth ripped from his mother at birth, raised by an abusive father, trained to be a brutal fighter, showered with accolades for committing violence. On top of all that, his very genetic code is infused with the DNA of an eldritch horror from beyond the stars. Was there ever a chance for this guy? Sephiroth leaves the laboratory, telling Cloud he is going to see his mother. Cloud follows, and upon emerging from the mansion, witnesses that Sephiroth, in his first act of vengeance against humanity, has set Nibelheim ablaze, killing most of its inhabitants, including Cloud's mother. Cloud pursues Sephiroth to the Mako reactor, where he finds Tifa and her dead father. She takes Sephiroth's sword and attempts to kill him, but as we learned earlier through gameplay, the strength of Sephiroth is unassailable. He disarms her and strikes her down. Cloud charges in, rescues Tifa, and then moves on to confront Sephiroth. And that is where the flashback ends. Sephiroth disappeared after the so-called Nibelheim incident, only to reappear 5 years later near the start of the game, when he attacks Shinra headquarters, killing President Shinra and taking the body of Jenova, which was being kept there. For much of the rest of the game, the party pursues Sephiroth as he ventures across the world, slowly making his way to the northern crater, where Jenova's body was originally found.
There are some confusing plot elements in Final Fantasy VII, and most of the confusion comes from the relationship between Jenova and Sephiroth. To begin, the names Jenova and Sephiroth are not chosen at random. Both carry religious significance, and go a long way in informing how these characters should be viewed. The name Jenova is a portmanteau of Jehovah, the Jewish name for God, and Nova, the Latin word for new. Thus, Jenova, a malevolent alien force that fell from the sky, is the new god, certainly a telling moniker for a being that tried to take over the planet. The name Sephiroth derives from the Hebrew word Sephiret, which refers to the 10 emanations through which the infinite nature of God manifests itself on Earth. If that sounds confusing, allow me to explain, and I do apologize for any omissions or errors I may make in this explanation. The subject of the Sephiret is complex, and I am by no means an expert in this field. According to Kabbalah, a branch of Jewish mysticism concerned with the nature of God, God is infinite. So to make his infinite nature understandable within the confines of a finite universe, he has distilled his essence into 10 aspects, the Sephiret. Among these are Hesed, love, Chokmah, inspiration, and Netzah, determination. Thus Sephiroth's name is a reference to how the aspects of God, or the new God, as the case may be, manifest themselves in the temporal world. Given that Sephiroth is capable of moving about while the apparently dead and frozen remains of Jenova cannot, it makes sense to read these names as saying that Sephiroth is the worldly aspect of Jenova, just as the Sephiret are the worldly aspects of Jehovah. A very confusing element of the story is that from the Midgar section onward, the party pursues Sephiroth, often encountering him in person. When they do so, they fight him, but the battle screen does not show a fight with Sephiroth. It shows a fight with Jenova. After the battle, a severed tentacle, part of Jenova's body, can often be seen. So, what exactly is happening? Is this thing we're pursuing Jenova or Sephiroth? In a sense, it is both. The most textually accurate interpretation is that Sephiroth does not actually appear in the game until Disc 2, when his body is found at the northern crater, encased in a massive materia orb. Sephiroth, as we learn near the end of the game, was killed during the Nibelheim incident, his body cast into the lifestream, where it slowly made its way to the northern crater. The Sephiroth we have been pursuing this whole time is Jenova, or rather, pieces of Jenova that are able to act independently, sort of like how severed parts of John Carpenter's The Thing are able to act independently. These Jenova parts take the form of Sephiroth, sometimes. Just in case that wasn't confusing enough, let's take a look at the so-called Sephiroth clones. Starting in Nibelheim, which has been reconstructed by Shinren, filled with actors to cover up its destruction, the party finds a number of black-robed figures, all of them bearing a numbered tattoo, and all of them muttering the word reunion. These people are not clones in the genetic sense, but are rather survivors of the Nibelheim incident who were captured by Hojo and injected with Jenova cells. So many cells that the will of Jenova has essentially taken them over, turning them into proxies of her consciousness. Spoiler alert for the remake. If you wondered who all those black-robed figures were that kept showing up, and why they sometimes appeared as Sephiroth or Jenova, there's your answer. The reason these figures utter the word reunion is because Jenova basically operates under T-1000 rules. When her body is dismembered, its various pieces coalesce, moving together to form a reunion with the rest of her body. Sephiroth's body contains a massive amount of Jenova's physical matter. It is one of the most important missing pieces. Since it is encased in materia and can't move from its location at the northern crater, the pieces of Jenova that can move, the black-robed figures and the tentacles the party finds throughout the game, gather there to reunite. This all raises a big question. Why does Sephiroth appear in the first disc at all, if every time we encounter him, we are really just encountering a piece of Jenova's body? Is Jenova simply choosing to appear as Sephiroth? When we see Sephiroth on the boat from Junin or in the City of the Ancients, are we really just looking at an illusion? In the most literal of interpretations, yes. But such a reading severely weakens the emotional impact of these scenes. How can we, as players, develop an emotional attachment to Sephiroth when what we think is Sephiroth isn't even Sephiroth? It would be a bit like trying to get invested in a movie when we know that everything that happens is merely an illusion, with no consequences for the characters. The gaming equivalent of, "It was all a dream." A less literal, but more literary interpretation, one that preserves the internal coherence of the plot and allows one to feel an attachment to Sephiroth, is grounded in another religious doctrine: Christianity. In Christian theology, the Holy Trinity refers to the relationship between God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, often called the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. These three figures are distinct from each other, but they form a cohesive whole. Jesus is the Son of God, and God is the Father of Jesus, yet they are, simultaneously, the same being. God is Jesus, and Jesus is God, and the Holy Spirit is both of them, while at the same time, they are both it. The specifics of how this work has been the subject of theological debate for literally thousands of years, but the basic concept of the Holy Trinity, consubstantiality, applies to Sephiroth and Jenova as well. Jenova is Sephiroth, and Sephiroth is Jenova. So when a black-robed figure or a severed tentacle appears to the party as Sephiroth, it is not an illusion. It is merely a truthful expression of one of Jenova's aspects. It may seem like I'm stretching here, but there is plenty of textual evidence to support this reading of Sephiroth and Jenova having a dual nature. Sephiroth's duality is emphasized many times throughout the game. As mentioned before, his character design is filled with contradictory elements, and at one point he appears as two figures superimposed on each other. During the game's final battle, Sephiroth appears in two forms, one satanic, one angelic, and his satanic form features two distinct bodies.
Then there is the comparison with Jesus. Sephiroth is, in no uncertain terms, the son of Jehovah, just as Jesus is the son of God, or Jehovah. Sephiroth seeks to rule the entire planet, to become the King of Kings, if you will, a title often applied to Jesus. We learn that Sephiroth's plan to take over the world involves summoning a meteor that will severely injure the planet, causing Lifestream to flood in and heal the wound. Sephiroth plans to be at the center of this wound, to absorb the Lifestream into himself and cease to be as I am now, only to be reborn as a god. Apotheosis, similar to how Jesus ascended to heaven after his crucifixion. Keep in mind that both methods involved wounds, only in the case of Jesus, they were wounds upon himself, while Sephiroth will inflict wounds upon the planet. One could also read the Lifestream as an analog for the blood of Christ, a spiritual substance with the power to heal. Indeed, Lifestream is, on more than one occasion, called the blood of the planet, and keep in mind that the planet is treated as a sort of deity in-game. But while Jesus gives his blood to the world, Sephiroth will take the world's blood into himself. Jesus achieved apotheosis by sacrificing himself to save humanity. Sephiroth will achieve apotheosis by sacrificing humanity to gain power from himself. There are many other parallels between these two figures, with Sephiroth serving as a mirror image for many of Jesus' attributes. He is an inverse of Christ in some ways, the opposite of him. It is therefore reasonable to claim that within the context of Final Fantasy VII, Sephiroth is the Antichrist. And this seems as good a place as any to transition to our discussion of Aerith. If you clicked on this video, you probably know about Final Fantasy VII's most well-known moment, a moment that has been etched into the hearts and minds of nearly every gamer who has experienced it. The death of Aerith at the hands of Sephiroth is one of the most memorable scenes in all of gaming, and was a benchmark in defining video games as a medium of legitimate artistic expression. I still remember the first time I saw Aerith die. I was 13 years old and had been playing Final Fantasy VII for the better part of the day. After solving the puzzles in the City of the Ancients, I found my way to a fairy tale castle surrounded by a pristine lake. At the center of this lake was a small platform on which Aerith was praying. I approached her, Cloud indicating for the rest of the party to stay back. The game then transitioned to an FMV cutscene, wherein Cloud and Aerith, their faces illuminated by the shimmering light of the surrounding water, looked upon each other. Aerith smiled, happy to see him, and then a shadow fell, black and predatory. Sephiroth, wielding a sword, landed just behind her, plunging his weapon through her body. She slumped forward, her face affixed with the horrified expression of someone who could not believe this had just happened to them. And then, Sephiroth smiled. Aerith's form collapsed to the ground, the ribbon in her hair unfurled, and a single materia orb fell from it, splashing into the water below. And that is the last time Aerith will appear in the game. Final Fantasy VII was not the first video game to kill off a playable character. It was not even the first game in the Final Fantasy series to do so. But this moment struck gamers to their core. I remember spending months scouring chat rooms and message boards for something, anything, that might bring her back. There were all kinds of half-baked rumors about how you just had to finish the Midgar section without taking damage, or if you started a new game while holding down these buttons, an NPC would appear who could sell you an item that would revive her. But it was all just wishful thinking. A few game-breaking bugs aside, there is no way to bring Aerith back. And she died for good. Even today, it's hard to articulate just how I felt when I first experienced this scene. It wasn't the shock of it, or the violence, or the senselessness that got to me. It was the feeling of loss, a deep and profound sense of emptiness, at the knowledge that this
fictional character I had known and liked and played as was truly gone, and that there was nothing I could do to bring her back. I said earlier that because of the materia system, the various party members can feel like interchangeable skins, able to fill any role if given the right equipment. But Aerith was different. She had the highest magic stats of anyone in the party, and nearly all of her limit breaks were devoted to healing and buffing. She was, unambiguously, the designated healer/support character, better suited for that role than anyone else. And then she died. To have a gameplay asset snatched away, without any chance of getting it back, can be a very effective way of generating a sense of loss within the medium of video games. I've already talked about how Quiet's departure from Metal Gear Solid 5 did something similar. But on a more fundamental level, permanently killing off a playable character just feels wrong. This is a video game. Playable characters die all the time in video games, but never permanently. Video games have extra lives, revival items. Hell, Final Fantasy VII has revival items. In a video game, there's always a way out. There's always some way to beat death. But not this time. John Green, in his analysis of the 1951 novel Catcher in the Rye, made the point that even if you don't believe in ghosts, the dead still haunt us. And the way they haunt us is that they never stop being dead. It's a strange thing to feel grief for a fictional character, but I think most of you watching this have felt that at some point. Be it the death of Spock or Mufasa or Bambi's mother, there's something impactful about having a character who is good and loving and noble snatched away by the machinations of the cruel and wicked. As a storytelling device, Aerith's death is extremely effective. Throughout the game, we have been following Sephiroth as he murders one person after another. When he kills President Shinra, we are likely to respond with jubilation that this villain no longer draws breath. When Sephiroth kills faceless Shinra guards or the equally faceless Sephiroth clones, we know there is some evil to this act, but we can't really connect with those being killed, faceless as they are. When Sephiroth kills Cloud's mother, or Tifa's father, we feel grief for those who have had their loved ones taken away, feel grief for Cloud and Tifa, but that grief is secondary. These were their parents, after all, not ours. But with Aerith, the sense of loss is personal. Because no matter how much has been made of her death, in articles and listicles, in memes and parodies and tweets, it is not the way she died, but the way she lived that really matters. We first meet Aerith at the very start of the game, when she is peering into the emanations of a broken Mako pipe. We are immediately struck by her character design, and on the surface, its extremely unsubtle elements. Her pink dress, flowing hair, giant bow, and basket filled with flowers. Obviously, we are looking at a character who is young, and innocent, and delicate, and probably a virgin, and oh, male gamer, don't you just want to ride in on your gallant steed and sweep her off her feet? But then we look closer. Over her pink dress, she wears a red jacket made of sturdy fabric, and on the sleeves of this jacket are a pair of iron bangles, thick and bulky and industrial, a form of improvised armor. Similar protection is on her wrists, and in addition to carrying a flower basket, she carries a metal staff, strong and sturdy, the kind of thing that could bash in the face of any would-be attacker. On her feet she wears not a pair of dainty sandals, but combat boots, thick and heavy and well-worn. In short, she is well equipped to handle danger, and personality-wise, she is no shrinking violet. Her first line of dialogue comes in a brief, almost perfunctory scene immediately following the destruction of Mako Reactor No. 1. As civilians scatter about in panic, Aerith is knocked down, but before Cloud, or the player, has a chance to help her, she picks herself up, dusts herself off, and continues on her way. She asks Cloud what happened, and here the player has the choice to warn her that she should move on, in which case she does, or to comment on how one doesn't often see real flowers in Midgar. If the latter is chosen, Aerith will offer to sell Cloud a flower for just 1 gil, and after doing so, she will walk away, irresponsive to any other attempts at dialogue. Not the actions of a damsel in distress. We re-meet Aerith a few hours later, when fate lands us in an abandoned church which serves as her flower nursery. Again, at first blush, this seems like such unsubtle storytelling. An angelic young woman surrounded by flowers, in a church no less, all while lilting music plays. But then she begins to speak, and she has a personality that is forward and flirtatious, even snarky. When Cloud says he does a little bit of everything, while assuming the stance he often does when trying to look cool, Aerith laughs at him. It is a teasingly good-natured laugh, but a mockery of his affectatious machismo nonetheless. We see throughout the game that Aerith possesses an almost uncanny ability to see people for who they are, to cut through pretense and performance and reach the true self, but never in a way that is judgmental or belittling. A good example of this is when the party first arrives at the Gold Saucer. This takes place just after Barrett reveals his backstory. The painful memories of Corell's destruction fresh in his mind, Barrett is in a foul mood, and the sugary fakeness of the Gold Saucer is doing little to make him feel better. Aerith suggests that everyone has been under a lot of stress lately, and so it would be good to cut loose for a while and have some fun at the park. Barrett snaps at the suggestion, basically telling the party to do whatever the hell they want, he doesn't care. Tifa, who is a little shyer and more nervous than Aerith, asks if it wasn't just a bit harsh to be talking about having fun while Barrett is in such a bad mood. Aerith responds, "Just act normal when this happens." This is a somewhat awkward translation from the original Japanese, which, according to Tim Rogers and his excellent Let's Mosey, a slow translation of Final Fantasy VII, reads something like, "In times like this, it is best to not go unnaturally out of one's way to be considerate." In other words, Aerith understands that Barrett's bad mood is temporary and will likely pass. She understands his internal fortitude, and understands that becoming angry is simply the way he deals with stress, the way others might cry or become withdrawn. Rather than draw attention to Barrett's negative mood, it is best to act as if everything is fine, because really, it is. In acting normal, Barrett will have a stable emotional environment to return to when he's ready. The well-intentioned interventionism of someone like Tifa may not be what he needs right now, and Aerith possesses the emotional intelligence to know this.
I love her.
Me too, Tim. Me too. Simply put, Aerith is cool. She's kind and caring and selfless and all the other things her character design would suggest, but she's also witty and confident and socially capable, knowing when to give a hug or tell a joke, when to be serious and when to be silly. She understands people. She understands herself. Despite her demure look, Aerith is one of the few core party members with an explicitly stated romantic past. Prior to meeting Cloud, she had a serious relationship with a man named Zack, also a member of Soldier. Zack appears very briefly in the game, but his connection to the main plot is rather significant, and he has become a prominent figure in subsequent works. We'll look more at him later. Furthermore, Aerith knows her self-worth. In exchange for escorting her back home following an encounter with the Turks, Aerith offers Cloud a single date as payment, and Cloud does not argue with this offer. We also see that Aerith, who sold Cloud a flower for just 1 gil, will charge up to 500 for those she doesn't like. Street smarts, social acumen, humble confidence, genuine kindness. What's not to like about her? That's what makes her death so impactful. Aerith is often identified as a Christ-like figure, and there is textual evidence to support this reading. I've mentioned before that the hairstyles of Aerith and Sephiroth intentionally mirror each other, and they have other contrasting similarities as well. Sephiroth believes himself to be a Cetra. Aerith actually is one. Aerith is primarily defined by her kindness, Sephiroth by his cruelty. Aerith presents an outwardly soft exterior while possessing great stores of internal resolve.
Sephiroth's outward aggressiveness masks a fragile and insecure ego. Throughout development, Aerith and Sephiroth were meant to have some sort of connection. At one point, they were to be ex-lovers, in another, brother and sister. In the final version of the game, their connection is more thematic than relational, but it is there. I've argued that Sephiroth should be viewed as a sort of antichrist, and by that token, Aerith should be viewed as a sort of anti-Antichrist, or in other words, Christ. Like Christ, Aerith is a little more than human. While not explicitly divine, she is the last of an ancient race of magic users who had the power to create life, a power Christianity assigns to God alone. In gameplay, she is shown to be especially adept at healing wounds and curing ailments, something Jesus was also known for. She can, quote, speak to the planet, which remember is treated in-game as a sort of deity, and she is best able to hear the planet while in her flower garden. Jesus was also known to communicate with the deity whilst in a garden. She is a child of two worlds, with a full-blooded Cetra mother and a full-blooded human father. As with Jesus, she contains elements of both the human and the supernatural. And then, of course, there's her death. Of all the contrasting elements between Aerith and Sephiroth, the biggest difference comes from their respective possession of two unique materia orbs. Materia, remember, are powerful artifacts capable of casting magical spells. Most are equipable and used in-game, but there are two unique ones that serve no gameplay purpose, yet are still crucial to the overall plot. These are the black materia, possessed by Sephiroth, and the white materia, possessed by Aerith. Sephiroth acquires the black materia late in Disc 1, and uses it to summon a meteor. This is all part of his plan to achieve apotheosis and gain control over the entire planet. The white materia, by contrast, is with Aerith from the beginning. When Cloud meets her for the second time, she tells him that she has a special materia orb that is good for nothing at all, but she keeps it around as a memento of her deceased mother. This white materia, presumably passed down from Cetra to Cetra throughout the ages, is capable of summoning Holy, a magical force with the, quote, power to remove everything that is bad for the planet. Not long after Sephiroth acquires the black materia, Aerith departs on her own and travels to the City of the Ancients, where Sephiroth kills her. Her purpose in traveling there was to summon Holy, which she does by praying. This is where the exact narrative function of her death becomes controversial. Near the end of Disc 2, Bugenhagen says that if a soul seeking Holy reaches the planet, it will appear. Throughout the game, returning to the planet is used as a euphemism for death. In this context, it is easy to read Aerith's death as a necessary sacrifice. Only by dying and entering the life stream will she be able to summon Holy, destroy Meteor, and save the planet. And of course, such a world-saving sacrifice would perfectly be in line with reading her as a Christ-like figure. But there is some additional context here that needs looking at. To start, Jesus was aware of his impending death and accepted this fate, even if he did not wish for it to happen. Aerith does not go to the City of Ancients expecting to die. Before she departs, she tells Cloud, "I'll come back once it's all over." This could be read as metaphorical, as Aerith saying that she and Cloud will be reunited in the live stream once he's dead as well, but there is another chink in this interpretation. Late in Disc 2, long after Aerith's death, Cloud tries to justify her passing by saying, "I'm sure she wanted to give her life for the planet." But Tifa responds, "Really? I wonder. I don't think that's it at all. I think she didn't think that she would die at all, but that she planned on coming back all along. She always used to talk about the next time. She talked about the future more than any of us. I think Aerith looked forward to tomorrow and the future more than anyone." And there is even stronger evidence against her death being necessary. Near the end of the game, Bugenhagen accompanies the party to the City of the Ancients to deign the true nature of Holy, the white materia, and how Aerith ties into all of it. He learns that Holy, when summoned, will remove everything that's bad for the planet, and it is left ominously ambiguous as to whether or not humans fall into this category. He also learns that the white materia, when activated, will glow a pale green, and that right there is the smoking gun that proves Aerith did not have to die. In the cinematic in which Sephiroth kills her, a single materia orb, the white materia orb, falls from Aerith's hair, and it is glowing pale green. By the time Sephiroth killed Aerith, Holy had already been summoned. The notion that she somehow had to die to summon Holy is proven false by this scene. Now, it is true that Holy does not immediately appear to destroy Meteor after Sephiroth summons it, but this is because Sephiroth is constraining Holy within the lifestream. One can see this quite clearly in the second-to-last battle screen. That white glow? That's Holy. And that red rock thing surrounding it? That's Sephiroth, keeping it from being released. After the party defeats Sephiroth in the livestream, his ability to contain Holy is broken, and it is released, traveling to Midgar to destroy Meteor, as well as everything else that is bad for the planet. But Holy is not powerful enough to destroy Meteor. The lifestream itself needs to be summoned to aid in Meteor's destruction, and the final shot of the game shows Meteor being torn apart by the combined forces of Holy and the lifestream, while Aerith's face looks on. This can be seen as saying that, even if Aerith did not have to die to summon Holy, she did have to die to summon the lifestream. So if she didn't die, humanity never would have been saved. So she's a Crass-like figure after all. But a careful reading pokes some holes in this argument's logic as well. To begin, it's not clear whether or not humanity actually was saved at the end of Final Fantasy VII. The ending is extremely ambiguous. Some might even call it unsatisfactory. We do not see Meteor get destroyed. We do not see the party celebrate having done a good job. An after-credits scene, set 500 years in the future, does show Nanaki with two cubs visiting the ruins of Midgar, as the sound of children's laughter can be heard in the background. But this is far from a definitive conclusion. It could be that Meteor was destroyed, humanity was saved, and everyone lived happily ever after. It could also be that, in removing everything bad for the planet, Holy removed humanity as well. Remember, Nanaki is not human. The children's laughter could merely be the ghosts of what once was. Yet this all belies a more obvious point. If Sephiroth had not constrained Holy in the first place, it would have had much more time to work on Meteor, and probably would have destroyed it. As we see in the ending cinematic, Holy was not released until moments before Meteor would have struck the planet. If not for Sephiroth, the lifestream would not have needed to be summoned. If not for Sephiroth, Meteor never would have been summoned in the first place. If not for Sephiroth, Nibelheim wouldn't have burned down. Cloud's mother never would have been killed, or Tifa's father, or Aerith. Aerith's death was not part of some grand design arbitrated by the fates. She did not sacrifice herself. She was just murdered. If that's not enough to convince you, perhaps the words of the developers themselves will. An enduring but inaccurate myth is that the idea of Aerith's death came about when Hironobu Sakaguchi's mother died during development of the game. In fact, Sakaguchi's mother died in 1988, nearly 10 years before development on Final Fantasy VII even began. And the idea to have a mainline character die was that of Final Fantasy VII character designer turned Kingdom Hearts lead Tetsuya Nomura, not Sakaguchi. Nomura stated in a 2003 interview with Edge magazine that he had grown frustrated with the, quote, perennial cliché where the protagonist loves someone very much and so has to sacrifice himself and die in a dramatic fashion to express that love. He found this to be a trite and frankly inaccurate depiction of how death is felt and experienced in real life. In that same interview, Final Fantasy VII's director, Yoshinori Kitase, said, "In the real world, things are very different. You just need to look around you. Nobody wants to die that way. People die of disease and accident. Death comes suddenly, and there's no notion of good or bad. It leaves not a dramatic feeling, but great emptiness. When you lose someone you love very much, you feel this big, empty space and think, if only I had known what was coming, I would have done things differently. These are the feelings I wanted to arouse in players with Aerith's death. Feelings of reality, not Hollywood. If the developer's intention was to leave players with a sense of loss and emptiness, they succeeded. Aerith's death remains one of the most notable moments in all of gaming, even making it in as an Easter egg in Wreck-It Ralph. There just wouldn't be that level of impact if she hadn't been someone worth knowing in life. The developers have said on multiple occasions that the central theme of Final Fantasy VII is life. And they have stated almost as frequently that one cannot talk about life without also talking about death. We now come to the character of Tifa Lockhart, the character that, I will admit, I was least looking forward to analyzing when I started this project. It is not because I dislike Tifa, far from it. I find her to be perhaps the most relatable character in the game, but she is also the most subtle. Most of the main cast telegraphs who they are and what they are about, but Tifa, as her last name suggests, keeps her emotions locked in her heart for much of the narrative. For this reason, she can seem underwritten, especially when one looks at her development history. Initially, Cloud and Aerith were to be the two romantic leads, their star-crossed love, ending in tragedy, forming the emotional linchpin of the story. But fairly early in development, the idea was floated to introduce a secondary female protagonist, one who would vie with Aerith for Cloud's affection. Director Yoshinori Kitase liked this idea. Thus, Tifa Lockhart was conceived. For this reason, Tifa is sometimes dismissed as merely the other girl. The fact that she forms the third corner of a love triangle is explicitly stated in the game's manual, and her sexualized design has often been used as fodder for bad faith criticism. Video Game Donkey referred to her as the brain-dead one with comically large boobs, and Yahtzee Croshaw said that if Final Fantasy VII were a dating sim, Tifa would be the freebie. I remember in the 1990s a rather misogynistic dynamic developed, wherein self-proclaimed men of culture would pronounce Aerith the proper choice when it came to love interests. That preferring Tifa only showed one's inclination for airheaded bimbos over women of substance. I would like to say this dynamic has subsided over the years, but unfortunately my time on Twitter has shown me that the discourse surrounding who Cloud should end up with has only grown more toxic. Before giving Tifa a proper analysis, it needs to be said that when it comes to pandering to the male gaze, Tifa and Aerith are equally guilty. It is true that Tifa is more voluptuous than Aerith and wears more revealing clothing, but Aerith's slender, virginal design is no less in line with conventional views on feminine beauty than Tifa's. An unfortunate reality is that any worthwhile analysis of Final Fantasy VII must acknowledge that the game was developed at a time when public views on women were less progressive than they are today, and it was developed in a country where views on women continue to be less progressive than they are in many other places. We've already seen this in Sid Highwind's problematic relationship with Shera. Additionally, Final Fantasy VII was a game developed by heteronormative males for heteronormative males, and this perspective can be seen in almost every aspect of game design. The main character, intended as a self-insert for the player, is male, and has multiple female characters express romantic interest in him, including a few who are underage. Many of these elements have been reworked in the remake and other iterations to be more in line with modern expectations about such things. But this is an analysis of the original game, and we must look at that game's strengths and weaknesses on their own terms. Perhaps you're getting a sense as to why I was not looking forward to writing about Tifa. Shipping dynamics and character design issues aside, another thing that makes her difficult to talk about is how she undergoes her arc. Throughout this project, I've been talking about how the core party members undergo changes as the game progresses, how they overcome their emotional traumas and become more actualized individuals. Nearly every character gets at least one scene that is unambiguously about them. A scene that more or less completes their arc. Barrett's confrontation with Dyne, Nanaki discovering the truth about his father, Sid finally going into space. Tifa has no such scene. The closest we get is when she ventures into Cloud's subconscious to help him discover his true identity. And while this is a beautiful sequence, and we will be talking about it later, that scene is about Cloud, not Tifa. Yet despite all this, Tifa remains a compelling character. And that is because, out of the entire cast, she is perhaps the most human. Allow me to explain. One thing to remember about fictional characters is that they are not people. People are complex and contradictory, and oftentimes their behaviors don't really make sense. Characters, by contrast, are simplistic, existing to serve a specific role within a story. They often fall into one of several archetypes: the wise old man, the awkward nerd, the bratty younger sibling, and so forth. Final Fantasy VII is no different. Sid, for example, is the gruff but lovable techie and a source of comedic relief. Reeve and Cait Sith are takes on the honorable general who works for the bad guys but eventually joins the good guys trope. Barrett, Vincent, and Cloud vary in the specifics of their characterization, but they are all, one way or another, subversions of what is expected in an action protagonist. As for Tifa, it could be that she really is just the other girl. But a fair look at what she does and why she does it reveals less a character and more a complete and complex human being. Let's begin with Tifa's backstory. Like Cloud, she was born in the small town of Nibelheim. Unlike Cloud, who was raised by a single mother, Tifa had two parents, with her father being the town's mayor. As such, there was quite a socioeconomic divide between Cloud and Tifa, and as we see in flashbacks, they were not especially close as children. Tifa, as the mayor's daughter, was popular and had a large circle of friends. Cloud, by contrast, was a loner, often referred to by Tifa's pals as that weird kid. There was some infatuation between them at this age, especially from Cloud, but parental and societal pressures kept them from realizing this. Then, when Tifa was 8, her mother died in a hiking accident. Refusing to believe she was really dead, Tifa convinced herself she was only missing, and set out into the mountains to find her. Her friends followed, but as the path became more and more dangerous, they turned back one by one. All except Cloud. Eventually, when it was just the two of them, Tifa slipped and fell down the mountainside. Cloud tumbled after to save her. Tifa was severely injured and fell into a week-long coma. Cloud only scraped his knees. They were discovered by some townsfolk, led by Tifa's father. Already distraught over the loss of his wife, and now facing the possible loss of his daughter as well, he lashed out at Cloud, blaming him for taking Tifa into the mountains and ordering him to never see her again. Tifa, now motherless, had learned that her so-called friends, when times got tough, would not stand by her. Cloud would, but she was forbidden from seeing him by her powerful and influential father. Cloud, in no position to defy such a man, resigned himself to his fate, his loneliness. 5 years passed. Tifa was now 13, Cloud 14. Defying her father, he mustered the courage to speak to her. He asked her to meet him at night at the town's water tower, where they might be alone. There he announced that he would be leaving for Midgar to join the soldier program. "I'm going to be the best there is, just like Sephiroth." Tifa did not take the news well. Cloud, the only person her age who had shown her genuine loyalty, was leaving and would probably not come back for several years. But she wouldn't let him go completely. She asked, demanded, really, that he make her a promise. "If you get really famous and I'm ever in a bind, you'll come and save me. I want to experience that at least once." Cloud seemed confused by this request, but agreed to it all the same. For 2 years, Tifa lived alone with her father in Nibelheim. And during that time, she seemed to undergo a period of personal growth. She began taking martial arts lessons from an esteemed instructor named Zangan, and quickly became one of his best students. She took to hiking in the mountains where her mother had died, eventually becoming so familiar with the area that Sephiroth hired her as a guide when he came to inspect the Mount Nibel reactor. Then Nibelheim was destroyed. Her father, the last surviving member of her family, was murdered, and in her attempt to avenge him, she was grievously wounded by Sephiroth. Is it any wonder, then, that after so much loss, when Cloud showed up in Midgar 5 years later as a mercenary for hire, Tifa tried very, very hard to keep him in the employ of Avalanche. We see her efforts throughout the first sections of the game. Cloud and Barret share a strong initial dislike, and shortly after their first mission together, Cloud says he's fed up with Avalanche and decides to leave. Tifa begs him to stay, but he refuses. It isn't until she brings up the promise, essentially calling it in, that Cloud agrees to another mission. Things go well for a while, but as the game continues, Cloud's behavior becomes more and more unnerving. It begins early on, in a brilliant bit of dramatic irony wherein Tifa knows something that the player does not. At the start of the game, the player has no reason to doubt Cloud's story that he is an ex-soldier turned mercenary. But Tifa does. He claims that the last time he saw her was 5 years ago, during the destruction of Nibelheim, and after the party leaves Midgar, there is a lengthy flashback sequence wherein Cloud describes the events of that incident in great detail. But that is not at all in line with Tifa's memories. As far as she can remember, Cloud was never there. Instead of Cloud accompanying Sephiroth, there was a black-haired soldier named Zack. Aside from a few Shinra grunts, no one else arrived in Nibelheim that day. Cloud's stories, his memories, his claim that he was in Soldier, all of that is a lie. But the player doesn't know that, because Tifa has not told them. She hasn't told anyone. These discrepancies weigh more and more on Tifa as the journey continues. At points throughout the game, Cloud suffers from hallucinations and fugue states, moments where he passes out for no discernible reason, or acts in strange, erratic ways. Sometimes he seems to question his own memories, and when he does, he turns to Tifa for reassurance. At one point, he asks her why they didn't spend more time together when he came back to Nibelheim. She says she can't remember and then quickly changes the subject. It is not until well into the journey that Tifa can muster even the slightest ability to challenge Cloud on his claims she knows can't be true. In Cosmo Canyon, she asks, "You really are you, right?" Cloud doesn't know what to make of this question, and she quickly plays it off. But by now it's clear to the player that something is bothering her. Things start to bother the player as well. In the Temple of the Ancients, Cloud becomes violent. He attacks Aerith, his assault not stopping until he is forcibly subdued by a party member. Later, in the City of the Ancients, Cloud almost murders Aerith, only stopping when his fellow party members intervene. Clearly, something is very, very wrong with Cloud. But even so, Tifa doesn't say a thing. The truth comes to the surface not long after Aerith's death. The party pursues Sephiroth to the northern crater, and there Sephiroth dives into Tifa's mind, projecting her memories for all to see. The player, for the first time, sees Zack accompanying Sephiroth. Cloud dismisses it as a mere illusion, but Tifa can't keep up the facade any longer. "No, Cloud, that's not true," she says. Cloud is confused. "Aren't I the same Cloud you grew up with?" Tifa does not answer. Cloud's resolve begins to crack. "Soldier. When did I enter Soldier? How did I join Soldier? Why can't I remember?" Sephiroth then reveals the truth. Cloud wasn't at Nibelheim. Cloud never joined Soldier. Cloud, the character we've been playing as this entire time, isn't even Cloud. Sephiroth reveals that after the destruction of Nibelheim, Hojo created the so-called Sephiroth clones, those shambling black-robed figures seen throughout the game. These clones are people who have had massive amounts of Jenova cells injected into their bodies, turning them into proxies of her consciousness. Cloud is one of those clones, and not even a complete one. 5 years ago, you were constructed by Hojo, piece by piece, right after Nibelheim was burnt. A puppet made up of Jenova cells and the power of Mako. An incomplete Sephiroth clone, not even given a number. All the other clones have numbered tattoos on their arms. Cloud does not. But he is just as much under Sephiroth's control as they are. The hallucinations, the fugue states, the moments where he becomes violent and erratic, all of that was the will of Sephiroth. The Jenova cells in Cloud's body allowed Sephiroth to manipulate him, to turn him into, as Sephiroth puts it, a puppet. Cloud wasn't pursuing Sephiroth. He was being summoned. Like all the other clones, he was being called to the reunion. But if that's true, then where did all his memories of Nibelheim come from? Remember that Jenova has telepathic and even shape-shifting abilities. Tifa found Cloud in a gutter shortly before the start of the game, and in that moment the Jenova cells in his body were able to read Tifa's mind, using her memories to shape him into a familiar form, to craft a persona that she would accept. That's why he knew about the promise. That's why he knew about Nibelheim. His sense of identity shattered, Cloud gives himself over to Sephiroth and Jenova. He delivers the black materia to them, and from this act, Meteor is summoned. As that happens, the party flees, and a massive blast of magic knocks Tifa unconscious. When she comes to, she is in Shinra's custody. Meteor is on its way to destroy the planet, and she and Barret are on their way to a public execution. All because she wanted to believe that he really was Cloud. The fact that Tifa does not reveal her misgivings has caused some to view her in an unfavorable light. She does not tell any overt lies in the game, but one could make the argument that she is lying by omission when she does not correct Cloud on his false claims. I get the impulse to blame her. Cloud, after all, is the main playable character, the one we, the player, are supposed to personally relate to. And Tifa deceived him, deceived us, or at least allowed us to deceive ourselves. But consider her perspective for a moment. As a little girl, Tifa lived a charmed and privileged life. She was surrounded by friends and family, and enjoyed a position of status within her little community. Then, at a very young age, her mother suddenly died, and her childlike mind, unable to process the grief of this loss, set off into the wilderness to find her. Her so-called friends followed, to a point, but they abandoned her. That day she learned just how far their friendship would extend when she really needed it. But there was someone who would stand by her. Cloud, that funny little poor kid from next door. He was willing to do what the others could not. Then she fell, was injured, nearly died, and when she came to, her father, now her only family, commanded that she never see that Cloud boy again. For 5 years she lived without a mother, with friends of only the fair weather variety, and the one person who had shown actual loyalty to her was someone she was forbidden to see. But one day he did come to her. He asked her to meet her, at night, in a secluded place where they could be alone. What do you think a 13-year-old girl would have in mind when the boy she's been pining after makes such a proposition? It probably wasn't that he was going to leave town and likely wouldn't be back for many years. But she couldn't let him go, not that easily. She made him promise to come back for her, promise to save her if she ever needed saving. He agreed, and for Tifa that would have to be enough. So Cloud left,
and once again she was alone. Perhaps spurred by the growing realization that if she didn't look after herself, nobody would, Tifa took a more proactive approach to life. She trained in martial arts that she might protect herself from physical danger. She overcame the mountains that had taken her mother and explored them so thoroughly that after 2 years she was qualified to guide others through them. Maybe Cloud would come back one day, maybe he wouldn't. But in the meantime, Tifa would become strong. Her life improved, got better, until one day a legendary war hero, a celebrity beloved the world over, revealed the evil inside of him. In a rage, Tifa attacked this man, determined to kill him. But he disarmed her as if she were a child, and struck her down. Just imagine what it would be like to go through all of that. No home, no parents, no friends, not even that one boy who was nice to you all those years ago. What would you do in that situation? Tifa decided to get revenge. She left the smoldering remains of her old life behind and went to Midgar, seat of Shinra's power. There she met a man named Barret, who, like her, had very good reasons to fight against the corporation. A few others joined their cause, and soon Avalanche was born, an organization that might take down Shinra, might save the planet, might undo some of the evil that had destroyed Tifa's life. And so her next chapter began. 5 years passed. Tifa established a small bar to serve as a front for Avalanche's operation. Her days were spent planning and executing attacks, her nights mixing drinks and slinging hash for a small band of regulars. Probably not how the daughter of a mayor thought her life would turn out, but it would do, for now. Then one day, by happenstance, she came across a familiar figure at the train station. Was it? No, it couldn't be.
Cloud,
she cried out.
Cloud, is that you?
Tifa, came a garbled but familiar voice. Tifa. Cloud. Cloud. Yeah, that's right. I'm Cloud. And it was Cloud. He was older, yes, so was she, but the hair, the face, the body? Yes, it was him, back after all these years. But why was he lying in the gutter next to a train station?
How long's it been? She asked.
5 years, he responded. But that wasn't right. It was 7 years, not 5. Well, he did seem a little out of it. Maybe he just hit his head or something. He joined Soldier, obviously. I mean, he had the sword and the uniform and everything. She asked him what he'd been up to, and he told her that he had joined Soldier but had quit and was now seeking work as a mercenary. A mercenary, she must have thought. That's perfect. He can join Avalanche. He can be with me again. So Cloud joined up and helped Avalanche destroy the reactor in Sector 1. A little interpersonal drama between Cloud and Barret aside, the mission was a success. That night, Tifa made him a drink. He called it beautiful. And they sat down and reminisced about the good old days. He kept saying it had been 5 years since they'd seen each other, but whatever, 5 years, 7 years, it doesn't matter. What matters is that he's back. What matters is that he kept his promise. And then, just a few days later, she lost everything. Shinra, with its trademark subtlety, destroyed the pillar supporting the plate above Sector 7. The plate fell, crushing the slums below. Tens of thousands were killed, all to wipe out a tiny group of revolutionaries. Her friends, her regulars, her companions in Avalanche, the bar she had maintained for all these years, gone. Shinra had taken everything from her. Again. Well, not everything. Cloud was still there. And as long as she had him, everything would be okay. I don't blame Tifa for keeping quiet about the indiscrepancies in Cloud's story. I do not believe she kept the truth locked in her heart because she was greedy, or selfish, or weak.
I believe she did it because she is human. And sometimes, humans stay quiet for the sake of those they love. We now come to the final character in this analysis, Cloud Strife. Cloud, as the game's protagonist, is the character players are most meant to identify with. With a presumed primary audience of adolescent, heteronormative males, Cloud ticks all the boxes necessary to engage such people. Older, but not too much older. Strong, muscular, handsome, good at fighting, sexually desirable, utterly unflappable, and with a cool, detached attitude and an almost sneering disregard for everything and everyone around him. Oh yeah, Cloud was everything gamers thought they wanted. The connection between Cloud and the player was so strong that it was not uncommon for gamers to name Cloud after themselves. I remember one day I was talking to a schoolmate whose older brother played the game. I asked him who his favorite character was, and he said, Jake. Who's Jake? I asked. You know, Jake, the main guy. Sword, spiky hair, Jake. As I later learned out, his older brother's name was Jake. The reason young men connected to Cloud so strongly is not hard to see. He promised them a power fantasy, and not in the passive way they might get from watching a Rambo or Terminator movie. Cloud allowed them to embody the fantasy, to directly feel his strength as he slaughtered Shinra troops, to experience his desirability as nearly every female character in the game flirted with him. The dark, dystopian setting of Midgar helped sell this fantasy. You were not some stuffy knight on your way to rescue a princess from a castle, not some warrior of light on your way to find a crystal. You were a terrorist, fighting a corporation, and your partners were a huge black guy with a machine gun for an arm, and a sexy girl in a miniskirt who knew kung fu. You weren't a moral hero like Superman, rescuing kittens from trees and helping old ladies cross the street. Oh no, you were Batman, or even the Punisher, grim and violent, meting out harsh justice to a harsh world. Perhaps the most pandering moment in the game is when Cloud crashes through the windows of Shinra's headquarters astride a huge motorcycle called, I kid you not, the Harley Daytona. This moment is followed by a minigame wherein Cloud uses his sword to strike down pursuing motorcycle cops in a sequence that wouldn't seem out of place in an 80s action film. Selling that scene was this poster, which made the rounds on websites and gaming magazines. Let me tell ya, this image right here sold a lot of copies of Final Fantasy VII to the 13-year-old boys of the world. It certainly sold a copy to me. You can't really blame the game's marketing team for taking this approach. In the 1990s, edginess and attitude were the main selling points of most products aimed at boys. Plenty of games sold themselves on a similar aesthetic. The difference is that Final Fantasy VII doesn't keep up the facade for very long. About 5 hours in, the party leaves Midgar, and the world as a whole opens up. Here we see that Midgar, with its cyberpunk skyscrapers, impoverished slums, red light districts, and generally grim and industrial aesthetic, is the exception, not the rule. Most of the world is bright and vibrant, filled with forests and mountains and rivers. There are little towns populated by normal people just trying to live their lives, monsters that are really just animals and don't actually want to fight you. The world of Final Fantasy VII is not some dystopian playground the player can run amok in. It is a fundamentally good and balanced world, ruled by the laws of nature and not mankind. It is the world made by the Cetra, the world that was saved from Jenova when they sacrificed almost everything to stop her. It is the Cetra's gift to humanity. The only evil in this world is the kind made by Shinra. But that's just a thematic subversion. A much stronger subversion comes in the character of Cloud Strife himself. The cracks begin on the very first mission. Cloud is assisting Avalanche as they blow up Mako Reactor number 1, and so far he is everything this poster promises he is. He is fearsomely effective in combat. He is detached and taciturn. He is completely unfazed when Barrett tries to intimidate him. He tells the other members of Avalanche that he doesn't care who they are, and that once this mission is over, he'll never see them again. But then, when he's about to plant the bomb, he has a hallucination. A ringing sound appears, and the screen goes black, and a mysterious voice tells him, "Watch out, this isn't just a reactor." This particular line is a holdover from a planned scene that didn't make the final cut of the game, so it doesn't have too much meaning from a textual standpoint. But from a thematic standpoint, it shows that Cloud is, perhaps, not the most reliable of narrators. We see more evidence of that soon after, when Tifa expresses confusion at Cloud's comments that he last saw her 5 years ago. Cloud has more hallucinations as the game goes on, more moments when he passes out and becomes helpless. Not exactly the kind of thing Rambo would do. Cloud provides a detailed description of the destruction of Nibelheim, essentially giving himself a tragic backstory. But when the party arrives at Nibelheim, the town is intact, and no one there seems to have any idea that it supposedly burnt down. Now the party is starting to doubt Cloud somewhat, and perhaps the player is too. The game continues, and Cloud's image as an aloof tough guy continues to fall away. In the Temple of the Ancients, Sephiroth seems to get a hold of him and make him do things. Cloud starts acting in strange and erratic ways, laughing maniacally and talking about the Black Materia. When he comes into possession of the Black Materia, Sephiroth commands Cloud to give it to him, and Cloud obeys. A piece of Cloud's psyche, his childhood self perhaps, begs him not to do this, as do the members of the party, but Cloud cannot resist. He gives the materia to Sephiroth, and then he violently attacks Aerith, only stopping when a party member steps in to subdue him. Sometime later, Cloud wakes up. Barrett and Tifa are there, the ones who have been with him the longest. Cloud is no longer acting like the cocky hardass he was at the start of the game. He is vulnerable, frightened even. He says he doesn't know what's happening to him, and he worries that he won't be able to control himself if Sephiroth comes near again. Cloud admits that he is afraid. And the one thing an action protagonist is never supposed to be is afraid. He doesn't want to go on, but Tifa and Barrett promise to stand by him. He has friends, and he's starting to learn that. Tifa tells him, "We're all with you," and Barrett, keeping in line with his own character, promises Cloud that if he falls under Sephiroth's influence again, "I'll smack you upside your spiky white head." With trepidation, Cloud agrees to go on. Aerith has been missing since Cloud attacked her, but she tells him in a dream that she has gone to the City of the Ancients to stop Sephiroth from summoning Meteor. Cloud goes there and finds her, and once again under the influence of Sephiroth, he draws his sword and attempts to strike her. This is an excellent bit of interactive storytelling, as the developers force the player to experience Cloud's terror, his helplessness. Every button the player pushes brings Cloud closer to the attack. Like Cloud, the player is helpless, unable to defy the will of Sephiroth. Just before Cloud is about to strike, his friends cry out. Some merely say, "Stop!" Others, like Sid, call Cloud a dumb shit. But the intention is the same. All of them want to help him, keep him from doing something terrible. And Cloud is able, for just a moment, to regain his composure with the help of his friends. But ultimately, it doesn't matter. Unable to get Cloud to murder Aerith, Sephiroth swoops in to do the job himself. Cloud, once so stoic and unflappable, breaks down, expressing his emotions for Sephiroth and the player to hear. "My fingers are tingling. My mouth is dry. My eyes are burning. The cycle of nature and your stupid plan don't mean a thing. Aerith is gone." After laying Aerith to rest, Cloud meets with the party to discuss their next move. He is honest with them, honest about himself and their mission. "To tell the truth, I'm afraid of myself. There's a part of me that I don't understand. the part that made me give the black materia to Sephiroth. If you hadn't stopped me, Aerith might have been... That's why I should quit this journey, before I do something terrible. But I am going. Sephiroth destroyed my hometown, killed Aerith, and now he's trying to destroy the planet. I must go on. I have a favor to ask of you. Will you all come with me to save me from doing something terrible? Without exception, they agree. I don't know how Aerith tried to save the planet from Meteor, and I guess we'll never know. But we still have a chance. We must get the black materia back before Sephiroth uses it. Let's go. That final "let's go" is much more telling in the original Japanese. Tim Rogers, in his analysis of the game's English translation, explains that in this scene, Cloud uses the phrase "ikuyo." Japanese, unlike English, has many variations of the same word or phrase, depending on the mood or status of the speaker. Ikuyo is a soft, polite, suggestive way of saying "let's go," the sort of thing you might say to an elder or a superior at work. Up until this point, whenever Cloud has said "let's go," he's been using the more assertive "ikuzo," which in Japanese media is often used by cool guy characters to show that they are cool. That Cloud is now using a less assertive version of the phrase shows that he is starting to doubt himself. Starting to realize, perhaps, that all of his pretense of being tough and detached is merely that. Pretense. As I explained in the Tifa section of this video, it is at the Northern Crater that Cloud's sense of identity completely breaks down. There it is revealed that Cloud is not the person he thought he was. He is not some small-town kid who rose through the ranks of soldier only to give that up and become a mercenary. He is an incomplete Sephiroth clone, a failed science experiment cobbled together from Genova cells and the memories of Tifa. So worthless, Hojo did not even bother to give him a number. In one of the game's saddest moments, Cloud turns to Hojo and begs him for a number. That is how desperate he's become for any sense of identity. Hojo refuses, calling Cloud a miserable failure. Cloud then goes to Sephiroth, finally understanding the real reason he's been chasing after him. I wasn't pursuing Sephiroth. I was being summoned by Sephiroth. All the anger and hatred I bore him made it impossible for me to forget him. That's what he gave me. Meteor is summoned, and it appears that in short order, all life on the planet will end, and Sephiroth will be reborn as a god. Cloud's story could have ended there, but it doesn't. Had Cloud's arc merely been that he deluded himself into thinking he was something special when he wasn't, it would have made a subversive, if somewhat mean-spirited commentary on how players relate to such characters. There are several games that have taken similar approaches, forcing the player to confront why they play video games and what sort of experiences they hope to get out of them. The "you enjoy all the killing" line from Metal Gear Solid was my first exposure to such commentary, and games such as Spec Ops: The Line and especially Undertale have provided insightful meta-commentary on the medium of video games and the ways players derive satisfaction from committing virtual violence. Had Final Fantasy VII ended with Cloud giving himself over to Sephiroth, it likely would have joined the ranks of such games. But it goes a bit further than that. Many commentators have remarked that, until quite recently, popular media's notion of what makes someone a hero has been narrowly defined. Whether young or old, male or female, ubermensch or everyman, a hero is someone with resolve. They are motivated, driven, and most importantly, they do not doubt the morality of their convictions. They may doubt their capabilities for a dramatic beat or two, but neither they nor the audience will ever question if the hero is doing the right thing. This applies to characters as diverse as RoboCop and Disney's Pocahontas. It even applies to a literal child in Home Alone. Heroes can be many things, but doubtful is never one of them. Our modern perspective has recontextualized such characters, drawing elements to the surface that were always present but usually went unremarked. As such, many sequels and remakes of older properties take an almost postmodern approach to the way they investigate their protagonists. Alan Moore arguably began this trend in 1986 with Watchmen, a deconstruction of the superhero genre that asked what the sort of archetypes common in said genre would be like if suddenly transposed to the real world. The answer was mostly psychopaths. Since then, self-aware commentary has seeped into almost every facet of modern media, with even Disney getting on the trend in works like Ralph Breaks the Internet. This investigative approach into the psyches of fictional characters has led to the current media climate in which everything is self-aware and which characters actively call attention to the tropes associated with their archetypes. The James Bond, played by Sean Connery, was presented by the filmmakers, and largely accepted by the audience, as a dashing playboy living on his own terms. The modern iteration, with Daniel Craig, calls attention to the fact that a man like James Bond would probably be insecure and unhappy, possessing few, if any, meaningful relationships. It is this unhappiness that drives many of James Bond's distinctive characteristics: his excessive alcohol consumption, his pursuit of one meaningless sexual encounter after another, his tendency to approach danger with a reckless disregard for his own safety, and even the safety of others. In short, the kind of people who are fun to watch in a movie are the kinds of people you would not want to know in real life. And this applies directly to how Cloud is presented at the start of the game. If Cloud truly was the aloof badass he pretended to be, he would be virtually incapable of love. His friendships with his fellow party members would mean nothing. His romantic potential with Aerith and Tifa would never be more than skin deep. Thus, when he was revealed to be a soulless puppet, that reveal would perfectly mesh with how he initially presents himself. But as we soon learn, Cloud is more than a puppet. He is more than an action protagonist. He is someone who is worthy of love. And the best part? He doesn't even have to do anything special to earn it. A few in-game hours after Sephiroth summons Meteor, the party is at its low point. Cloud, shown to be nothing more than a Sephiroth clone, is missing. Meteor is on its way to strike the planet. No one, not even Shinra, has any idea of how to stop it. This is where I left off with my analysis of Tifa, and this is where I will return to her character. Tifa and Barret are about to be executed by Shinra, but Cait Sith rescues them, and they escape aboard Cid's airship, the Highwind. Tifa, rather than try to stop Meteor, is determined to find Cloud, wherever he might be. She eventually finds him in a previously unreachable section of the map, in a small tropical village called Mideel. After asking around the village, the townsfolk say a young man matching Cloud's description is being treated at the local clinic. Elated, Tifa dashes there, only to find Cloud in a disassociative state, almost completely unresponsive to everything around him. The doctor informs her that when Meteor was summoned, a rift opened near town, and the life stream poured out. Within that torrent was Cloud. This young man's been exposed to a high level of Mako energy, the doctor explains. He probably has no idea who or where he is now. He is literally miles away from us, someplace far away where no one's ever been, all alone. Cloud is now little more than a vegetable. But Tifa decides to stay with him all the same. It is true he is not the boy she knew back in Nibelheim. He isn't the one who promised to protect her, the one who stuck by her when she tried to find her mother. He is not the originator of those memories. But that doesn't change what they've been through over the course of the game. All of their time spent together up to this point, all of the moments shared between them, the victories, the losses, the battles, those count. Sure, Cloud started out like a 13-year-old's version of a cool guy, but he didn't stay that way. There were moments when he dropped the pretense and revealed his truer, deeper self. Moments when he apologized. Moments when he listened. Moments when he showed vulnerability and admitted that he wasn't some island that didn't need human affection to feel complete. I pointed out back in Barrett's section that in video games, gameplay itself is enough for characters to develop bonds with each other. All the challenges Cloud and Tifa overcame together, all the enemies they defeated and places they discovered, those mattered to the player and to her. This husk of a man, even if he isn't Cloud, he still showed her love. And she will return that love. The party, sans Cloud and Tifa, goes off to try to find a way to stop Meteor. All the while, Tifa stays by Cloud's side, nursing him, even though the chances he will ever recover are slim. But then fate, or perhaps the will of the planet, throws her a lifeline. An opening to the life stream appears, and Cloud and Tifa fall into it. There, Tifa finds herself in a strange sort of spirit world, deep in the life stream. She is in a visual representation of Cloud's subconscious, with broken pieces of his psyche floating all about. One of these pieces, a part of Cloud's childhood, approaches her. He tells her that she must help Cloud find his true self, and the way to do that will be to rectify his disjointed memories. Cloud is afraid, a mere child in this moment, but Tifa is there to help him make sense of the whole thing. I can think of no greater act of love than that. They begin with the moment Sephiroth arrived in Nibelheim. Cloud is still insistent that he was the soldier accompanying that group, but Tifa, finally brave enough to speak honestly, tells him he wasn't there, even though she really wanted him to be. Cloud is confused, frustrated, but he is able to accept this truth. Tifa's truth. The soldier standing by Sephiroth's side was Zack. They move to a different memory, a memory of Tifa's childhood home. The memory of when her mother died and she went to the mountains to find her. Cloud recalls the way he felt back then, seeing Tifa with her friends. I used to think they were all stupid, he says. But no, I'm the one who was stupid. I really wanted to play with everyone, but I was never allowed into the group. I kept hoping that maybe if I hung around enough, they would invite me in. So I hung around. If that doesn't remind you of your childhood, then I envy you. We next see their journey to the mountains, the fall, the reprimand by Tifa's father. We hear how Cloud processed all of this. If only I could have saved her. I was so angry at myself for my weakness. Ever since then, I felt Tifa blamed me. Cloud convinced himself that he was weak, and that being weak was the worst thing a person could be. After stewing in negative emotions for a few years, he resolved to join Soldier. If I got strong like Sephiroth, then everyone might accept me. If I could just get stronger, then even Tifa would have to notice me. Cloud, his true feelings for Tifa being buried for so long, is finally able to speak them plainly. Soldier, Sephiroth, his departure from Nibelheim, even the hard-ass image he adopted because that's what teenage boys are told they're supposed to be. All of it was an attempt to get Tifa to accept him. Everything he did was for the love of this one girl. And now comes the best part. Is the Cloud we've been playing as really just a bunch of Genova cells mixed with Tifa's memories? No. As we learn in what is arguably the emotional climax of the game, Cloud was in fact at Nibelheim, just not as a member of Soldier. Cloud did leave home, and did travel to Midgar, and did apply to the Soldier program. But he wasn't accepted. After telling the girl he loved, not to mention all the doubters in town, that he would come back a war hero, this failure had to cut deep. This proves it, he must have thought. I really am just a loser, a fuck-up, a nobody. There's no way Tifa would ever accept me. Unable to join Soldier, Cloud did the next best thing and enlisted in the Shinra army as a regular footman, no different from the countless faceless grunts the player has been mowing down the entire game. But even grunts get sent on missions. Remember how, in addition to Zack and Sephiroth, 3 Shinra foot soldiers arrived in Nibelheim. One of those foot soldiers was Cloud. Unable to face the shame of his failure, he kept his helmet on the entire time, not revealing his face to anyone except his mother. That's why Tifa was so sure he wasn't there. But he was there. He experienced the destruction of his hometown, experienced the death of everyone he had known growing up, experienced the death of his mother. In the Mount Nebel reactor, Zack attempted to stop Sephiroth, and though he fought bravely, Sephiroth's power was too much for even a first-class member of Soldier to overcome. It was certainly too much for Tifa. Cloud witnessed the entire thing. He recovered Tifa's wounded form and brought her to safety. Through the pain, she burbled, You promised that you'd come when I was in trouble." She didn't know that the person who rescued her was Cloud, but she did know that she was rescued. As Sephiroth prepared to release Jenova, Cloud took up Zack's sword and charged in, driving it through Sephiroth's back.
Mom, Tifa, my hometown, give it back! I had so much respect for you.
Sephiroth is injured, but not killed by this blow. Driven by a sadistic desire to see Cloud suffer, or perhaps simply unable to fathom that a lowly grunt could pose any threat, Sephiroth let Cloud live. But Cloud continued his pursuit, and on the bridge over the chasm where Mako energy is extracted, Sephiroth ran his sword through Cloud's shoulder. "Don't push your luck," he warned. But Cloud would not back down. Not even against Sephiroth. His love for his mother, for his hometown, for Tifa, that is stronger than anything else. Cloud took Sephiroth's blade in his hands, and with a mighty final push, hurled Sephiroth into the gaping chasm below. Cloud, the boy who thought he was a failure, the boy who was ostracized by his community, the boy who could not make it into Soldier. This was the man who defeated the greatest warrior in the entire world. Not because he was the strongest, or the toughest, or the most emotionally detached, but for the same reason he accompanied Tifa up the mountain, for the same reason he made that promise to her on that starry night, for the same reason he broke into the Shinra building to save Aerith, the same reason he stood by Barrett in the Corel prison, and Nanaki in the Cave of the Gi, the same reason he forgave Yuffie and Cait Sith, the same reason he accompanied Sid into space, and Vincent when he tried to make amends with Lucretia. Cloud's greatest strength, even when he was in denial of it, is his capacity for love. Just like Aerith and Tifa and Barrett and all the other playable characters in the game, it is that, and not their capacity to commit violence, that makes them heroes. Before concluding this video, there are a few loose plot threads I want to address. Zack, as you may have recalled from my segment about Aerith, was not just a member of Soldier. He was Aerith's boyfriend, and her first love. In the aftermath of the Nibelheim incident, both Cloud and Zack were captured by Hojo and experimented on for several years. The exact nature of these experiments is unclear, but it is implied that there was a little bit of psychic exchange between them. This is why Cloud believed he had joined Soldier and gone to Nibelheim in that capacity. Also, there was a lot of Mako exposure, which accounts for why Cloud has the fluorescent glow of Mako in his eyes despite not being a member of Soldier. Cloud also had some Jenova cells injected into him because Hojo just likes doing that to people. Not long after the events of the game, Zack managed to escape and took Cloud along with him. The long experiments had taken a toll on Cloud, and he was in a weakened, suggestive state. Zack decided it would be best to travel to Midgar and try to start a new life. His old girlfriend lived there, after all. After considering what he and Cloud might do for money, Zack declared, "Mercenaries, Cloud. That's what you and me are gonna be." Zack dressed Cloud in one of his spare uniforms, and eventually the two arrived at the outskirts of Midgar. But unbeknownst to them, they had been pursued by Shinra this entire time. The two were ambushed, and Zack was killed. The soldiers looked at Cloud in his weakened state and asked if they should finish him off. Their commander said he wasn't worth the bullets. His mind still addled, Cloud took up Zack's sword, wandered into Midgar, and was then discovered by Tifa in the gutter near the train station. To recap, Cloud thought he was a member of Soldier for 2 reasons. 1, his desire to be loved by Tifa gave him a strong incentive to believe that he had made it. And 2, the blending of Zack's memories with his own worked to create a sort of hybrid persona between the two. Zack appears very briefly in the original game, but from what we get, we see that Zack, unlike Cloud, really is the sort of self-assured cool guy Cloud tried to emulate. He's quick-witted, funny, and doesn't seem to take things too seriously. You know, the kind of guy women actually want to be with. Misinterpreting his coolness the way awkward people often do, Cloud adopted a somewhat immature interpretation of what made Zack desirable. Indeed, it is implied that Aerith's initial attraction to Cloud was because she saw a bit of her old boyfriend in him. But in what I think is an especially sweet moment, she says that was only the spark. As she got to know Cloud, the real Cloud, she started to appreciate him on his own terms. And I just think that's really cool. We now come to Disc 3, the final chapter of the game. The party stands at the precipice of the Northern Crater, ready to descend to the core to defeat Sephiroth and free Holy. After a long and multi-path trek through the game's final dungeon, the party arrives at the lair of Jenova and Sephiroth. Jenova is the first to fall, and Sephiroth is defeated not long after. But the game doesn't end there. Though Sephiroth's physical body is destroyed, his spirit lives on, in the Lifestream. From beyond death, he reaches out, literally seizing Cloud by his soul and dragging him to the very center of the planet, where their final battle can take place. In most action stories, this would be the final test of the hero's physical prowess, the moment where he puts all of his lessons to work and defeats a once insurmountable foe. But that's not how Final Fantasy VII plays it. A huge part of Cloud's struggle was that he convinced himself that he had to be as good as Sephiroth to be considered worthy. Before Cloud even met him, Sephiroth had a firm grasp on Cloud's psyche, his sense of worth. In other words, his soul. Here, we see that dynamic expressed literally. But Cloud is not the weak, insecure person he once was. He is no longer crippled by his insecurities, no longer feels the need to hide behind a mask of false courage. There is nothing false about his courage now. In the final command the player is allowed to issue in the game, Cloud unleashes his ultimate attack, Omni Slash, a limit break that strikes Sephiroth hundreds of times with impossible speed. Though expressed through gameplay, this is not an act of physical violence. It is a defiant, triumphant statement of, I am Cloud, I am worthy, and you no longer have any power over me. Cloud is not perfect. Nobody is. But he's still good enough, just the way he is. All of us are. What else is there to say about Final Fantasy VII? A lot, actually. I barely touched on the deeper dynamics of many of the supporting characters. I said very little about the extended compilation, and how the various prequels, sequels, and spin-offs recontextualize certain aspects and characters from the original game. I didn't talk at all about the remake, and how its treatment of faith and destiny leave the door open for all manner of changes in future iterations, and whether or not those changes will improve or weaken the story. I talked at some length about Final Fantasy VII's Jewish and Christian influences, but I said nothing of its connection to other religions, the way it borrows elements from Shintoism and the mythologies of ancient Greece and Scandinavia. And though you've heard plenty of it throughout this series, I haven't said anything about the game's soundtrack and just how much ass it kicks. There's a reason Nobuo Uematsu is called the Beethoven of video game music. Final Fantasy VII is a truly epic game, not just in the amount of content crammed onto its 3 discs, but in how it explores themes and emotions. It is not a perfect game. There are plenty of works that tackle the same issues, but Final Fantasy VII works because it caught us all off guard. In an era when the vast majority of video games had themes no deeper than kill the bad guys, Final Fantasy VII forced the young people who played it to face real issues and real concerns, to vicariously experience the emotions of guilt and self-loathing, of unrequited love and unrealized ambition, to grapple with real-world concepts such as corporate greed and environmental degradation, to experience loss and heartache and doubt, but also triumph and friendship and love. Final Fantasy VII brought all these things to an audience that many would have thought too young to understand. Those critics were wrong. Final Fantasy VII was, and is, one of the greatest video games ever made, a cornerstone of my emotional development and a cherished part of the adolescences of millions of gamers around the world. For all those reasons and so many more, that is why Final Fantasy VII matters. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, leaving a comment, or even subscribing to the channel. You can follow me on Twitter, and I also work as a freelance voiceover artist, so if you'd like to hire me for a project, please send a message to my business email, found in the description. Thank you again, and have a good day.